2018. First item that we have on the agenda this evening is the opening prayer and pledges of allegiance to the flags of the United States and the state of Texas. And Councilmember Crawford will lead us in those. If you'll join me in standing, please. The microphone's not on.
Now you can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for all the gifts you give us every day. Bless the people who unselfishly protect our city. I ask you to also protect these members of our police, fire, and EMS department as they risk their lives every day to make Schertz a safe place to live. Graciously watch over this council, that they may be guided by your Spirit to be wise in counsel, firm and good in resolution, and unwavering in their duty. Help us this evening and every day that we may all live a joyful and peaceful life through you and your prayers. Thank you. Jesus, flag of the United States of America, which says, one nation, under God, one people, liberty and justice for all. Honor for the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. All right, the first thing we have up this evening, actually, before I begin, I'd like to welcome Gilbert Garias, who is working on his Eagle Scout Awards, joined us this evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Encourage you to finish, get the Eagle Scout Award. It's a difference maker for the rest of your life. It's good stuff. All right, first item that we have tonight, employee recognition, and the fire department's first up. I'm the fire marshal. We have to introduce Chief.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. We're excited to be here tonight. We couldn't wait till the typical time. So we wanted to come bring our new fire marshal and introduce him to you. So this is Thomas Pender. He was born in New Braunfels, raised here in Schertz area, graduated from Canyon High School. He started out with Cibolo Fire Department while still in high school and received his EMT basic from safes here in the city of Schertz early on, and continued on from there through SAC to get his fire certification. He comes to us from Seguin Fire Department and worked in Kirby Fire Department prior to that, doing fire marshal duties and inspector duties, both places. Currently resides in the Blanco area with his wife and 4 kids. He's also got 2 other children that live in the San Antonio area, and one plays baseball here at the EVYA. Currently working on finishing his degree at Texas A&M San Antonio, and when he's not working, he enjoys hunting, fishing, camping, and doing activities with his children. So just wanted to say welcome.
Well, absolutely welcome, first of all. We're glad to have you with us. The microphone is yours, not mandatory, but it's yours if you wish.
Thank y'all for the opportunity coming into Schertz. Looking forward to working with y'all. If y'all need me for anything, please let me know.
Wonderful. Listen, we're very happy to have you with us and look forward to having you with the city for a long time. Thank you.
All right. And sorry, Mayor, just as a reminder, John Perry, who had been our fire marshal, has not left us. He has moved over to a battalion chief, sorry, I got that right, a battalion chief, so he is still with us, and we appreciate his work for us.
Absolutely. Next up, we have a presentation, the Texas Public Works Association Awards presentation. Mr. James and Mrs. Woodley.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Mr. James, Mr. Santee. Most of you remember the saga that's been going on for several years on Schertz Parkway. We identified a portion of it, our premier street in the city, was falling apart. We looked at some options, mill and overlay, some different things to sort of patch it up with what funding we had available for it. And I think council saw the wisdom of doing it right the first time and making a long-term fix. So we cobbled together funding for that. And about the time we were ready to go to construction, we were so fortunate in the engineering department to have engineer John Nowak and project manager Scott McClellan come on board, and both of them have wonderful experience when it comes to street construction projects. So they were able to manage the project and get it done in a manner that we really are proud of and would like to see the rest of our projects be done following that sort of way of putting something forward. At the end of the project, John, who's been active with the Texas Public Works Association throughout his career, recognized some special aspects of the project that he felt were worthy of some consideration, and suggested that we submit it to the TPWA as a candidate for a project of the year, and we were actually selected. And so with that, John will come up here. He's got a real brief presentation. I know we have a big agenda, but he'll tell you a little bit about what the award is about. With that, John.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and public. I'm pleased to be here this evening. I think this is kind of a big deal for the community, and I'm proud to be a part of it. As I get started, I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of history of the American Public Works Association in case you aren't familiar with it. It has been around for quite a while and has roots going back even further with two other kind of precursor organizations. The organization as a whole is a group of individuals dedicated to high-quality public works and serving the community. And the organization's primary missions are to educate, share information, and advocacy of public works. The Texas chapter happens to be, membership-wise, the largest chapter of the American Public Works Association. There are chapters all across the country as well as the provinces of Canada. Within the Texas chapter, there are branches. Having a branch allows, to kind of more focus on individual areas of the community and better serve its members' needs. We're part of the South Central branch of the organization. One of the things that the organization does is offer a recognition of projects over the course of the year. There's 5 main divisions that range, or they're broken up by dollar amount, and then there's 5 main categories. We applied for the transportation category. Some of the items that they use to select projects are, what adversities did we overcome during the course of the project? How were we environmentally conscious? You may recall we recycled the existing base and asphalt material that was on Schertz Parkway to become the new base rather than import new stuff into the project. That was one way we were environmentally conscious. How we dealt with the public and all of those kinds of things kind of play into what makes a successful project that we have out on Schertz Parkway. So last month at the Texas chapter's annual conference, at the award ceremony, you can see we weren't the only ones there. There was a pretty good crowd. The city of Schertz was recognized for the Schertz Parkway reconstruction project. So they gave a little blurb of our project, what we accomplished during the presentation, and then I'll turn it over to Scott to make some presentations of the actual plaques. There was a picture of Scott and I accepting the awards at the banquet on behalf of the city of Schertz.
Well, first of all, well done. Good job. Gentlemen?
Well, John and I couldn't have done it by ourselves, so we want to recognize Mark Hill with Ford Engineering. If he could come up and get a plaque here that we got for Ford Engineering's design of the project, and they helped with some of the construction oversight and making sure that their design got built as it was designed. So here you go, Mark, to have in your office. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Then we also have Troy Wayner with Capital Excavation. He was the superintendent for the project, and Capital did a great job all throughout working. Another component of the project was working with the community, and they were great out there on the job, and didn't really get any complaints. And so, job well done, Troy. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
And this is the City of Schertz one. We'll have down in our building.
Perfect. Well, listen, congratulations again. Anytime that we do what we might think of as somewhat routine for the city of Schertz, nothing, of course, is routine, especially anytime you're doing this construction project because there are always unknowns. But to be recognized for good work is, frankly, it's been a hallmark of our city for a long time. And thank you for perpetuating and continuing to do the kind of work that gets recognized from around the state. Well done. Well done. All right, next item that we have up this evening, we have announcements of upcoming city events. Mr. James or Mr. Waite? Mr. Waite.
All righty. This Thursday, July 26th at 5:30 in the afternoon is the ribbon cutting and the official opening of the Mary Whitfield Burks Park. Grand opening will begin at 5:30. And the encouragement from staff, especially for council, is to come dressed in your workout gear and test out the new equipment that's out there. Come dressed comfortably. It will be outdoors at 5:30 in the afternoon Thursday. The temperature is slated to be over 100 degrees, so please dress comfortably for that. And there may even be some challenges on different pieces of the fitness equipment, so just saying. Friday, July 27th, from 7:30 to 9:30 in the morning is the monthly coffee with the Chamber at the Schertz Chamber Welcome Center. Next Tuesday, July 31st, there is no City Council meeting, but Friday, August 3rd, at 8:30 in the morning here in the Schertz Civic Center is the annual budget retreat for City Council. Staff will be getting together on the 2nd at the same location, and council will get together on the morning of August 3rd. That's next Friday at 8:30. Then the next day, Saturday, August 4th, our Movies in the Park continues at 7 p.m. in Ashley Park. The movie will actually begin at 8:30, but the festivities begin at 7, and the movie of choice for August 4th is The Minions. It's another crowd pleaser. And then our next regularly scheduled City Council meeting will be Tuesday, August 7th at 6 p.m. here in the council chambers. Lastly, filing for the Schertz City Council election for November 6th began on July 23rd. It will continue through Monday, August 20th at 5 p.m. Folks can visit the website to get the packet, or they can contact the city secretary's office for that. That's it.
All right, very good. Thank you, sir. Next item, we have announcements and recognitions by the acting city manager, Mr. James.
Nothing, Mayor.
Nothing tonight. Next, we have announcements and recognitions by the mayor. I'm going to put somebody on the spot that has no idea this is about to happen, and I apologize in advance, but I'm going to enjoy it just the same. Mr. Cockrell, I understand that you made an announcement here recently, and for the years and years of fantastic services that you've given, my announcement is simply to let you make your announcement and share any commentary that you would like to with us. So welcome if you would, and sorry to put you on the spot, but I get a little fun, and I don't get to do that often from the chair.
Thank you, Mayor. The announcement, if the council members don't know, I am going to retire from the City of Schertz and as the General Manager of the Schertz-Seguin Local Government Corporation on August 31st. So I made that announcement at the board meeting this last week, and matter of fact, I visited with Sylvia this afternoon, and out in the vehicle I have my retirement packet that I need to take home and figure out what blocks I'm going to check and all that stuff. I worked that out with my wife. So I do want to thank the City of Schertz for giving me this opportunity to serve the community. It's been very rewarding for me. And I think there's a very good program as far as the wholesale supply of water to the city. I'm anticipating that it will continue and grow. And just thank you for letting me be a part of that. Now, you may still see me. I'm talking to the Cibolo Valley folks, and we might work something out, and I still may be involved on a consultant basis with Cibolo Valley. And the other thing is, last week I went and had my interview for the Regional position for the municipality's position that y'all nominated me for. The meeting where they're going to fill those positions is August 2nd, so I will be there. And I did disclose to them that I'm retiring, but the nomination is still in effect, and I still look forward to representing not only the City of Schertz, but municipalities throughout the region on the Regional Planning Group. So we'll see how that goes on August 2nd.
Fantastic. Will you tell everybody how long you worked both for the City of Schertz and the Schertz-Seguin Local Government Corporation?
I started in November of 2005. So actually, I started the day after Columbus Day, which is a holiday in the City of Schertz, and I'm retiring the day before Labor Day, so I guess, it all works out.
It's fantastic. Listen, in case y'all don't know, starting in November of 2005, which I had been on the City Council for all of about 5 months and really had no idea what I was doing. This guy has worked on our water system. And if you live in Schertz and you turn on your water and it comes on every day and it works every day and you don't need a water softener anymore, and when there's problems, you didn't know about it because this guy took care of it, he's the guy.
Well, I would like to give some recognition to Jimmy Hooks and the whole Public Works Department here.
Absolutely.
They're the ones that deliver the water to the homes. And
absolutely,
a lot of the work is within the distribution system of the city. We brought the water to the tank here at Live Oak and delivered it, and we've been able to do that. We have had some challenges in the past, and I'm sure there'll be challenges in the future, but we're poised to address those. And I think the expansion projects that we have going right now are very beneficial for the City of Schertz and should provide water for years, decades to come.
Indeed. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
Excellent stuff. All right, next item that we have on the agenda this evening, a hearing of residents, and first up is Anna Kadale. And Bama, I believe.
Good evening, City Council members and Mayor Carpenter.
Evening.
As you may recall, I competed on the United States Dog Agility team in the Netherlands this year. And in the individual event, I placed 125th out of 336 competitors. In the team event, my team placed 18th out of 57 teams. I came here tonight to inform you of that achievement, and I sincerely thank you for your donations as private citizens. But I also thank you for supporting the future generations of our wonderful community. Beware, I have a few of my 4-H'ers up and coming, trying to do the same thing I've done. And lastly, I have a gift for each and every one of y'all.
Very well done.
My experience in going over these past 3 times, my last time, to be under the age of 18 ago, has been beyond what I could ever imagine. Going over in Austria and to rock the
Excellent. Wonderful. All right, next up this evening, Father Ed, please. It's good to see you.
Your Honor, may it please the Council, my name is Father Ed Pavlicek, Jr., who until the first day of this month served as the pastor of the Church of the Good Shepherd here in Schertz and Immaculate Conception Church in Marion. Recently, Archbishop Gustavo reassigned me as the pastor of St. Thomas the Apostle Church in Canyon Lake. So hopefully my presence here is not out of order, but my heart does remain here in Schertz with the people of Good Shepherd Church as well with the many people the church serves, especially through the church's outreach ministry. During my tenure as pastor, Good Shepherd Church worked wholeheartedly with the staffs of RACAP and GRASP, as well as with the SCUCISD, to provide assistance with food, utilities, medicine, hotel rooms for the homeless, and in cases of domestic violence, and other assistance. In 2012, the church was the recipient of the SCUCISD Community Partner of the Year Award. The church's most prolific outreach involves providing food to the needy. Good Shepherd and Immaculate Conception are both affiliated with the San Antonio Food Bank. The team of volunteers estimate that between the two churches, we help over 100 families a month in the Schertz, Cibolo, Marion area. So please keep in mind that these approximately 100 families come almost every week for food and assistance. Currently, Good Shepherd's Food Pantry operates out of the classroom in the Religious Education Building. People gather in their cars on Monday mornings and have to wait until the food bank trucks arrive. Some come inside to wait, especially in inclement weather, but some like to sit in their cars. The space is woefully inadequate, and we lack proper refrigeration, which would allow us to provide more nutritious foods. The church is in desperate need of a new facility to provide better food service for the needy. This year, plans were drawn up for the construction of a building that we call the pantry. It provides for a large new facility for the food pantry, as well as a gathering space for the church to hold small gatherings, especially for funeral meals and special classes for the church and the community at large. The church has the funding for the project. However, there is a complication that has put a halt to the project. Our architects from Fisher Heck Architects, namely Derek Keck and Mark Navarro, have been working with the city, especially with Emily Grovey, who has been most helpful and congenial, on attempting to get a waiver or a variance regarding the building of an 8-foot masonry wall to separate the church's property from the property behind the church, which has been zoned residential. Until recently, that property, which was the property of the late Henry Gutierrez, was zoned commercial. Because the city is insisting that this wall be built, it is putting a damper on the pantry project. The architects estimate that the cost of such a wall, and believe me, it would be a long wall, would reach $100,000. And while it is known to me that a lack of finances cannot be cited as a reason to seek a waiver or variance, nevertheless, please know that money is a factor, but there is a greater factor that overrides the finances. That factor is the right of the needy to receive food. The City of Schertz core values state, do the right thing, do the best you can, treat others the way you want to be treated, work together cooperatively as a team. That is an admirable set of values, and we can all agree that the city's heart is in the right place. What is at stake here is the right of the needy to receive food. And so it is put to the council, may we work together to discern the right thing and to do the best we can to work cooperatively as a team and to treat others the way we would want to be treated. Or do we build a wall? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Father Ed. Appreciate it. And thank you for making the council aware, and we'll work with Mr. James and the staff to see what can be done. All right, next up this evening, Mr. Glenn Outlaw. Chief.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, good evening. Glenn Outlaw, 3729 Forsyth Park. First of all, I apologize. My comments tonight apply to an agenda item on your last meeting. However, I know this will come back before you again. And what I wanted to try to do tonight is answer a couple of those questions that were unanswered last meeting and to dispel a misconception that's held by a lot of people. I have some photographs. I'm not sure how to get to the directory to bring them up. There we go. Right there. Okay. So I wanted to start, and I know this is a little hard to read. It's not a PowerPoint. What I've got are just the easiest way for me to capture this was as a JPEG. There was a comment, or kind of a question about codes being conservative. It depends on how you define conservative. Most of the model codes, including the international codes that we use today, are consensus-based codes. And what here is kind of the process about how the whole thing starts. But the important thing about the code development process is the inputs come from all avenues of the building. It includes code officials, it includes fire officials, it includes builders, suppliers, and everyone gets a say in how this code is put together. So as a result, what you end up with is a consensus standard that's full of compromises. Nobody really gets everything they're looking for. And by the code's own admission, they are considered to be the minimum standards for safe construction. Certainly not all-inclusive, but the bare minimum. And then there was the question about where the 10-foot separation came from. I can't answer that specifically, but I can give you a little history. In the 1990s, there were 3 different code groups out there, and the city of Schertz was using the standard Building Congress codes. Building code, the fire code, they had one out there called the housing code. In '94, those 3 groups got together and decided that what this country needed was a single set of codes, and they formed the International Code Congress. Their first ICC codes came out in 1999. The International Residential Code, which is what we use for 1- and 2-family dwellings, came out in 2000. I can't tell you exactly when Schertz moved from SBC to ICC. I'm thinking it was around 2001, 2003, somewhere in that neighborhood. But what happens when you move from one set of codes to another is sometimes there's things in the old code that you really, really like that aren't in the new code, and you don't want to give them up. So you carry them over with amendments. And the one that's nearest and dearest to my heart is the SBC required a fire department connection to a sprinkler system to be within 75 feet of a fire hydrant. That wasn't present in the International Fire Code. So you'll look in the amendments, and I'm sure they're still there. We carried that forward as a local amendment. So my best educated guess is that's where this 10 feet came from, is when you go back to the old building codes, as Chief McAfee told you, on the commercial side, the closer you get together, the more stringent the codes are about fire separations. So my best guess is somewhere in there we had decided on 10 feet, and then as we moved to the new codes, we carried that forward. The other thing I wanted to address, and I hear it, I've heard it several times, and they say, well, I put that same stuff in my garage. Okay. Well, what I'm going to show you is that your garage is not a storage shed. I was over at Home Depot the other day, and this is a typical, I think this was a 8x12 or 10x12, and here's what it looks like on the inside. There's no interior finish at all, and this is typical. It's just open frame construction. Here's a little bit smaller one, something like I'm looking to put on my house, and the same thing on the inside. Well, here's what a garage looks like in a home being built today. You see all the sheetrock. You look at the ceiling. Now, this is a 2-story house, and above this garage is a habitable space. So that ceiling is required to be Type X fire-resistant sheetrock. The walls around, where it just separates it from a normal room, is at least, I believe, 1/2-inch sheetrock. This is a garage fire that we had about 10 years ago, and you can see when we got there. In fact, I'm sure Mr. Waite remembers them. These are his photographs. Here's what it looked like. That garage is fully involved. I mean, you could see where the flame was roaring out that door. And after the guys got the fire put out, here's what it looked like. Now, the ceiling is gone because the firemen pulled that down. But what I want you to note is there's very little fire damage above that ceiling. And I want you to remember this door right here. Okay? A couple more pictures of the inside of the garage and the ceiling. Here's the other side of that door from the garage. That's all that got inside that house. The laundry room, so here's a couple of pictures of their laundry room. The difference between the shed and the garage is construction and codes. Now, I don't personally have any photographs of a shed fire, so I Googled shed fire. And here's some I found. Here's a little one sitting in somebody's backyard. Here's another one. So my question is, why would anybody want that sitting right next to their house? Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, next up, Rose Hendricks.
Hi, Rose Hendricks, 3017 Turquoise, Schertz, Texas. Thank you, Mayor and council people. I'm actually here on a good note tonight. I'm here to thank the city for their support. Mr. James, we had a Sedona HOA meeting, and I know we have been to the city of Schertz many a times for y'all's help. Y'all were there to support us again. Mr. James had even delayed his vacation to be there for us. We had council members Crawford, Kaiser, and Mr. Edwards there in our support, and hopefully it will be a positive turnover of the HOA to the homeowners, and moving forward it will be good for everybody. So I just wanted to recognize the council people and all of y'all for your support throughout. It's only been going on since 2012, so I'm glad y'all are all glad too. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. And then lastly this evening, Brent Bolter.
Brent Bolter, 2633 Cloverbrook Lane. Mr. Mayor, Council, City Manager. At the last council meeting, we heard about telling the truth. So tonight, I come to speak some truths. Let's start at the beginning and identify a focal point of the ongoing drama we've been seeing at council meetings for a while now. That focal point is a bitter man who has been grinding an axe since he was on council and got passed over to be mayor pro tem. Since leaving council and losing 2 elections, he has set his sights on creating havoc in this chamber, dividing the city, and taking down those who he perceives to be his enemies or those that refuse to do his bidding. The first scalp he got was our former city manager. And let's all recall that it was the bitter man that called the press and told them to be present at the special council meeting to watch the city manager get fired. And fired he was. Did it end there? Oh no, he was just getting started. At the meeting of the interview committee to decide which applicants were going to be put forward to fill open vacancies in the various boards and commissions, Robin Thompson's name was put forth for consideration to serve on the Economic Development Corporation Board. The members of the committee, which included 3 council members, decided that Mr. Thompson was a qualified candidate for the position and decided to submit his name to City Council for approval. Despite the events that led to Mr. Thompson's censure by council and his losing the election to stay in his seat, that we could now move forward from that, and the city was now ready to allow Mr. Thompson to again serve the city in a different role. Let's now move forward to the council meeting of June 5th and the hearing of residents portion of the meeting when the bitter man steps up to the mic and proceeds to condemn Mr. Thompson and his selection to the EDC board and urge City Council to not approve his selection. We then come to the actual agenda item for approval of the resignations of certain members and approval of new members to the various boards and commissions. And during that discussion, 2 of the city council members that evidently supported Mr. Thompson's name being put forward for council approval now decide they can't support that decision. Only one of the council members that was a part of the interview committee stands by that recommendation. We then bear witness to another council member's very heated remarks directed at Mr. Thompson and stated opposition to Mr. Thompson being placed on the EDC board. A vote is held, and the bitter man's next scalp has been taken, aided and abetted by at least one member of council. Now let me be very clear. I have no issue with City Council deciding who should or shouldn't be on a commission or a board. That's clearly in your job jar. But could we not have all been spared the drama of the June 5th council meeting?
Had the two council members on the interviewing committee expressed their concerns at that meeting, such that Mr. Thompson's name is never brought forward. Oh, but that wouldn't have allowed for the spectacle that we had play out that night. The spectacle that the bitter man is clearly all about having at council meetings. Now, was the council member that spoke out in violation of your own rules of conduct? Some citizens thought so and wrote emails to the city asking for it to be addressed. So now we move to the last city council meeting when we have a closed session on the agenda to discuss if in fact there was a violation. And again, if there was or wasn't, that is up to you on the council to decide. Not for me, not for anybody else. That's for you to decide. And we have the next part of the bitter man's agenda of division and taking down his enemies play out in what can only be described as a despicable act. The bitter man proceeds to play a recording of the mayor and a council member having a discussion that in the final analysis proved nothing, did not indicate any wrongdoing, but was characterized as such by the bitter man. I have some additional comments to make in light of the playing of the recording. Number one, Schertz IT department, you should never let someone put a USB flash drive into a city computer that hasn't been scanned. That's how computers get affected with malware and viruses. I know it's happened to federal government computer networks. Number two, who took the actual recording? If it was a member of council, they should resign immediately. If it was a city employee, they should be fired immediately. It was and is a despicable act. Number three, are there other recordings? And if so, what? Closed sessions? Discussions of economic development and strategies designed to maximize the benefit to the city? And who might these recordings be shared with? Who potentially is benefiting from any additional recordings? Number four, what's in store in future council meetings? Playing the recordings or showing a video or pictures to further the bitter man's agenda of division and attempts to take down another scalp? I know more than a few of us are getting tired of it. But that being said, rest assured in council meetings from tonight going forward to Election Day, I'll be quite happy to come before you and speak some truths. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening, we have a workshop, and is the Cibolo Creek Municipal Authority, or CCMA, sewer rate presentation. Mr. Waite, Mr. Hooks, Mr. Ellis. Mr. Waite.
Mayor, members of council, tonight we have Clint Ellis, General Manager of the Cibolo Creek Municipal Authority, here to talk about their rate plan for the next year. And discuss kind of their 5-year plan, much like the city's plan, and where we are in it and where they're headed.
Very good. Mr. Ellis?
Thank you. Mayor, council, appreciate y'all having me out. Again, my name is Clint Ellis. I'm the General Manager of Cibolo Creek Municipal Authority. Here to discuss our 2019 through 2021 wholesale wastewater rates. Thank you. This slide shows some of the reasoning behind the rates I'm presenting to the council. Currently, CCMA's rates are not recovering our cost of service. Part of this is being driven by CCMA's discontinuing the use of impact fees to subsidize debt service. We've been doing that, working towards that for several years. That's a goal we should accomplish this year. Current wastewater treatment expansion is leading to higher operating costs. We are in the process of our first rate increase, our first capacity increase since the mid-1980s. We have an aging wastewater collection system that requires rehabilitation, which is ongoing. At the same time, we are seeing a large increase in capacity demands throughout our collection system. San Antonio water system came off our system in spring 2018. That represents about $500,000 worth of revenue per year that we have to replace. And the assumption is made that no new customer cities are coming onto our system in the next 10 years. This slide shows a few of the projects on our capital improvement plan that we are either constructing or nearing construction on. Dietz Lift Station is just down the street from the Schertz Animal Hospital on FM 78. That is completed. We're about to close that project out. OGR plant expansion located off Schaefer Road is an increase in capacity at our plant from 6.2 to 10 MGD. That is about halfway through construction. Town Creek Lift Station and Force Main is a new force main and lift station improvements taking place down 78. That serves everything from Cibolo City Hall up to the Northcliffe area. Schertz Lift Station gravity main, the Blue Bonnet gravity main, Olympia gravity main, and Retama gravity main are projects we will likely undertake in the next few years. This slide shows the rates. Currently, CCMA charges $3.58 per thousand. Fiscal year 19, that goes to $3.83. That's a 7% increase. Fiscal year 2020, $3.93. That's a 2.6% increase. Fiscal year 2021, $4.05 per thousand, 3.1% increase. Total increase through the period, 47 cents per thousand. For the fiscal year 19 increase, that should represent approximately $1.32 per month to the average Schertz homeowner. That's using y'all's current winter water average of 5,294 gallons per month. Total increase over the 3-year period should be about $2.49 per home based on the same winter water average. This slide shows the impact to the city of Schertz. Y'all pay on a per household basis to CCMA. Currently, you pay $18.95. That'll increase to $20.28 in fiscal year 19, $20.81 in 2020, and fiscal year 2021, $21.44. This slide shows a comparison of Schertz retail rates versus some of your neighboring cities. Schertz is at $34.43. Again, we use the same winter water average for all cities. Next closest was NBU, $37.03, all the way up to $15.91 in Bernie. Just to give you a snapshot of where we think the city stands. Very brief presentation. I'd be happy to back up and go into further detail on any item you'd like to chat about.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ellis. Council, this is a workshop item, so if you do have questions, comments, is the opportune and proper time to bring those up. Appears that we have none. Appreciate the presentation, and let us know as you begin to move forward, and if we have questions, we'll forward them to you and to the into CCMA.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening, we have the San Antonio River Authority, or SARA, sewer rate presentation. Mr. Waite, Mr. Hooks.
Mr. Hooks will be doing this presentation. I'll try to provide him the same assist that I provided Mr. Ellis, hopefully. Speedy, or is that you?
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Mr. James. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about the San Antonio River Authority wastewater rates. Just like Clint was saying, the CCMA serves the majority of our city with wastewater treatment, but we do have one small portion in South Schertz, in the Schertz, we reserve at Schertz Unit 2 subdivision. This is the area that's served by San Antonio River Authority. Each year, San Antonio River Authority currently provides wastewater treatment services to approximately 66 homes that are in the reserve of Schertz subdivision. Each year, San Antonio River Authority updates their rate schedule. They notify customers beginning June 1st, and the rates take effect. Their fiscal year starts July 1st of each year. The 17-18 rates were the customers paid a $17.71 base rate and then a $4.84 rate per 1,000 gallons. This year, with their new wholesale rate, the base rate went to $8.44 with a per 1,000 gallon at $4.69. So you can see the rate decrease of 52.3% on the base rate and a decrease of 3% on the per 1,000 gallons. We currently charge our customers the CCMA rate because of the different rates that we have, so everybody pays the same rate. If you have any questions.
All right, very good. Council, again, workshop, opportune time for questions, comments. Anyone? Mr. Gutierrez.
Go back to the other slide. I guess Need the calculation.
Did math right?
Very good. Anyone else? All right, if not, Mr. Hooks, thank you, sir. We'll move on. Next item that we have on the agenda tonight, we have our consent agenda items. We have the minutes, consideration or action regarding the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of July 10, 2018. Resolution 18R83, a resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing an agreement for provisions of professional services between the City of Schertz and the City of Schertz Economic Development Corporation and other matters there in connection therewith. Item number 3, Resolution 18R91, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, approving and authorizing a wastewater easement agreement along FM 482 from Daryl Jenke. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, and other matters in connection therewith. Item number 4, Resolution 18R92, a resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing a contract with C3 Environmental Specialties for silt removal in the East Dietz drainage channel between Dietz Road and Borgfeld Road. Council, any of these that need to be pulled and considered individually? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the items on consent?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Davis, a second from Mr. Crawford. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Have 6 ayes and no nays. The motion carries. All right, our discussion and action items this evening. Item number 5, Resolution 18R86, a resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the Schertz-Seguin Local Government Corporation, or SSLGC, budget amendment for fiscal year 2017-2018 in the amount of $2 million as a transfer to the SSLGC Repair and Replacement Fund and other matters in connection therewith. Mr. Waite, Mr. Cockrell.
Mayor, members of council, Alan Cockrell here, our general manager for SSLGC, to talk about a budget item dealing with a fiscal policy that SSLGC has, and then after that he will be presenting 2 budget-related items for SSLGC for the coming fiscal year.
Very good. Mr. Cockrell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The following 3 agenda items, number 5, 6, and 7, are kind of intertwined, so I think what I'll do is provide some commentary on all 3. If you have any questions, please let me know. And then, obviously, we're requesting action by council on those. The first one is the budget amendment for the current fiscal year. Schertz-Seguin has adopted a retains earning policy, and what we do every year after our audit, and the audit results are presented, we look at our retains earning, and it just so happens that we have $2 million above that threshold, our 3-month retains earning amount. So we're requesting a budget amendment to move that money into the repair and replacement fund. Now, everybody's going, oh, you've got $2 million, what are you going to do with that? To remind Mayor and Council, we have embarked the last several years on a cathodic protection program for our pipeline. We've completed the 42-inch and the 30-inch. The one we're embarking on now is the 36-inch, the pipeline that comes from Seguin over to Schertz, and that is an unbudgeted activity, and it just so happens it's a little under $2 million. We have selected a contractor. We will start work here later this fall on that project, so this will allow us to maintain our repair and replacement fund balance without eroding it using these retained earnings for that project. So that's what we plan on doing. If I can move on to the next agenda item, the O&M budget for this next year. We developed a budget. We do that every year. We develop a budget based on our projected expenses, and then that rolls into setting the water rates. So we have the proposed budget. There's actually a couple of decreases. One is in salaries, and it's not so much because I'm leaving. That was not projected when we developed this budget. It was, we had hired some additional staff this last year, and we feel that we're at full staff, so we were able to reduce our dependence on overtime. And so that has created a little bit of decrease there. We also see just a little bit of a decrease in utilities because we're not delivering as much excess to saws this year as we have in the previous year. That excess is programmed to cease in another couple of years when the Vista Ridge program comes on, but it does provide us some additional revenue at this point. We do have an increase in a couple areas. One is professional services, and that's due to one of those items. We purchased a new software program to manage our assets and to manage our maintenance on the system, and so the cost of that was added. And then technical services, we do have some increases with the groundwater districts and both mitigation and well monitoring fees that are due. So bottom line, we have developed a O&M budget that is around a little over $173,000 more than the previous year. It's projected at $9,116,093 for this next year. So then if we take that O&M budget and we roll it into our rates, which is the third agenda item, what we're projecting is a 1 cent per 1,000-gallon rate increase in our rates to our customers on the O&M basis. We have, I think, been very fortunate with the SAWS contract and some other contracts that we've had with outside customers to provide us to keep our rates down in the last 5 to 6 years since we started that SAWS contract. And so what that's done is that it's allowed us to manage our rate increases at a very low rate. Like I said, a penny is what we're requesting for this next year. I'm prepared to answer any questions that y'all would have on any of those items.
Very good. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Cockrell on Resolution 18R86? Not, is there a motion to approve 18R86?
So move. Second.
We have a motion for Dr. Scagliola, a second for Mr. Crawford. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 6 ayes and no nays, the motion carries. The next item that we have on our agenda is item number 6, Resolution 18R87, a resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, approving the Schertz-Seguin Local Government Corporation fiscal year 2018-2019 annual budget and other matters in connection therewith. Mr. Cockrell, anything else to add on that one?
No, sir.
Council, questions with regard to 18R87? Not, is there a motion to approve 18R87?
Mayor, make a motion to approve resolution number 18R87.
Second.
I have a motion from Dr. Scagliola, a second from Mr. Gutierrez. Any other questions, comments from council? If none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 6 ayes and no nays, the motion carries. Next item we have on the agenda this evening is item number 7, Resolution 18R89. A resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, approving the Schertz-Seguin Local Government Corporation fiscal year 2018-2019 water rates and other matters in connection therewith. Anything else to add, Mr. Cockrell, on
Yes,
this
sir.
one?
One thing I didn't highlight in your packet, you have that information, and I don't know if you've noticed that the City of Schertz pays more debt service than the City of Seguin. And the whole reason of that is the City of Schertz has assumed the debt service for the Guadalupe project for that additional water. So that's why that's different. In the past, those two numbers were the same, but Schertz has assumed that responsibility for that additional water.
All right, any questions, council? If not, is there a motion to approve Resolution 18R89?
Let's do the trifecta. So move.
Second.
I have a motion from Dr. Scagliola, a second from Mr. Davis. Any other comments or questions from council?
Mayor, if you will.
Dr. Scagliola.
Alan, what you've done, it's been mentioned already, how you've dedicated yourself to these programs, SSLGC and CVLGC, and just so very appreciative to have you at the helm of these. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Have a motion, a second. I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 6 ayes, no nays. The motion carries.
Just one comment.
Yes, sir.
Of course, we presented this to you after the Schertz-Seguin board approved, and I think the City of Schertz week before last approved, so we're final approved on all these. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. All right, the next item on the agenda tonight, we have number 8, or Resolution 18R93, a resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the acting city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement with the City of Cibolo relating to the purchase of up to 400 acre-feet of wholesale water from the City of Schertz annually and other matters in connection therewith. Mr. Waite?
Yes, sir. Back in March of 2015, the City Council authorized Mr. Kessel at the time to enter into a memorandum of understanding with Cibolo for the future provision of water for 2 specific areas in their community. One is a subdivision that abuts up to our North Cliff area, right at the city limits line, and the other one is for a commercial area at the corner of Wiederstein and IH-35. The housing subdivision is going strong for the city of Cibolo, and the commercial property, as we all know, is currently under development by them. And so they have approached us that one of the terms of the MOU was that before we could truly sell them water, that we needed to enter into an interlocal agreement to do so. And so the city has approached us and asked us to consider doing that at this time. The MOU called originally for 350 acre-feet of water. They've requested that to increase to 400 acre-feet of water. There will be 2 take points that they will take the water from. Both of them, basically, they're building a pipeline to one of our current water mains, and we'll be joining into our current water main. Together with them, we'll place a meter there, and that's how we'll know what to charge them for the water they service, how much water goes through there. It's for a maximum of 400 acre-feet a year. That is a maximum. Starting up front, that'll be a much lower amount. In the commercial property, there will be 2 construction meters off of a 3-inch line that they'll be using, and not quite sure yet how much in the subdivision they'll be using, but it's not going to be anywhere close to the maximum. And as both those developments continue to grow and continue to get to their maximum size, we'll get closer and closer to that 400 acre-feet of water over the next coming years.
Very good. Council, questions for Mr. Waite?
Mr. Waite.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Crawford.
I presume Brian told you that I talked with him this afternoon for a while.
Yes, sir.
And my question was about why we have both the water sale and the delivery charge in this document. Is there a story there that I don't understand or don't know?
So the wholesale water rate that is listed there pays for the water.
Right.
That covers our costs. That covers the wheeling costs to get it to that point, theoretically. The base rate that is included in this is a rate that will be charged monthly, and that's to reimburse for the expenses on our infrastructure. So the pumps, the storage tanks that we have to paint, all of those other things. That base rate in Dan Jackson's rate analysis when he developed these a few years ago, that base rate handles the infrastructure, the wear and tear on the system, whereas the water charge handles getting the water from down there in Seguin or down there in Wilson County up here to, Gonzales County up here to the take points at our city limits.
I understand that. We're going to sell water from SSLGC that comes to us, no problem. We're going to deliver that water through our city water lines. There's a fee for doing the delivery. I don't have any problem with that. My concern was, and I know 400 acre-feet of water is a very, very small amount of water. It's what the city uses this summer in 20 days. So it's not a big number, and it's a 40-year contract. I was wondering why we didn't have it written so that when the CVLGC pipeline comes online, which is Schertz and Cibolo sharing a water agreement, to move water and treat it and everything, to get it to our 2 cities, why would we then want to buy? Why would Cibolo then want to buy water when they've already got their own water? Why wouldn't we have that 400 acre-feet that we're selling? Why wouldn't we stop that and go ahead and continue the delivery fee charge for as long as they want it? 40 years is fine with me. I just wonder why we're going to go through all the bookkeeping and hassles, or are there other hassles that make it more effective? And I don't know all those answers, but I would rather see us not obligate 400 acre-feet of water, although it's not a big number, once they get their pipeline in place. That's just comments that Brian and I talked about, and Jimmy Hooks and I talked about that, and Alan Cockle and I talked about that today, just out of curiosity, why we couldn't make it a clean deal for delivery and a deal that stops when they have their water available, which they don't have right now to the need they would like, but they will. In what, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years?
So I think the timeline from CVLGC is probably still a little bit up in the air as to when we're actually going to start poking holes in the ground. 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, ideally that'll be there. Part of the reason, and honestly, their public works director and myself didn't talk a lot about doing that when CVLGC comes online, and I think there's probably a couple reasons for that. One is this water may likely be less cost for them, So they are currently evaluating all of their water sources. Unlike Schertz, the city of Cibolo has a multitude of water sources that they get their water from, and they're currently having that studied to determine what is the best, most efficient way to take water from their multitude of sources, in what order and in what amounts. And so there may be, when CVLGC gets done, the water that we're selling them at a wholesale rate may be cheaper than the CVLGC water, and they may want to continue to do that. The other reason is that they can also back down their usage and not pay us for water consumption. So if the CVLGC comes on board and it's running well and they want to take that water, then they can close off at that meter or not take anything else from that meter and take it through the rest of their distribution system. And we'd have a monthly charge that they'd probably want to talk about, that I think at that time we could sit down and probably come back and visit with council about, you know, now that CVLGC is up and running and producing water, we'd like to go ahead and terminate the interlocal agreement and get rid of that monthly charge. So I think there's a number of avenues for Cibolo. I think the CVLGC, although we're moving it forward, is still enough of an unknown that they wanted to have a secure method for their developers to understand that they were going to have water no matter what happens in the future, at least for the next 40 years. And so that was the reason we were doing it this way.
You sort of said that there's an option to do what I'm discussing anyway, but it's nothing like that is listed in this resolution or interlocal agreement.
That is correct.
And I would hate to see the two cities fight over, I need water, I need to pay the distribution charge, and we don't want to do that. I think we should do that, but I think we should have an option in the contract that says when you want to stop doing that, that's agreeable, those kind of things. I know I'm fighting about 400 acre-feet of water, which is nothing, and I have no intention of voting no, but I want my comments, I wanted to hear your comments about why, and if it wasn't discussed, that's okay, but I think it should have been discussed, because I would like to have Cibolo have a way out if they want to have one that's clean without any fighting, and I would like us to have the option to help them as much as we can. So I will quit asking questions and let us get on to voting. Thank you.
Anyone else? Dr. Scagliola?
Yeah, Dudley, I was just wondering, what's our excess capacity now, and for how long do we anticipate us to have excess capacity?
So right now, our capacity is limited by the size of our pipeline. Because SSLGC sells 12,000 acre-feet of water a year to SAWS. That pipeline is currently in process. The second parallel pipeline, or the parallel pipeline, or the second pipeline is in the design phase, and we're getting closer and closer to getting that under construction. That will help the capacity to get as much water as we need. It is estimated by the engineers, and if the weather we have been experiencing the last few weeks continues for the next year or two, is that we will start to bump into our maximum of our half of the Gonzales well field slightly before or at the time the Guadalupe well field that we're carrying the debt for will be coming online. A couple of things to help buffer that. One is our Edwards rights that we have. We have 1,764 acre-feet of Edwards water we can use. We will, as council probably knows, we've been selling that annually in one-year agreements down to 1,000 acre-feet, and we're starting to back off of that a little bit just to make sure that we have an adequate emergency supply. This is written where we can turn on the Edwards and use that to help supplement that as well. And then council may also remember, and one of the reasons that we went forward with SSLGC water in this agreement is because we entered into an agreement with Seguin and SSLGC about 2 months ago that would allow us to sell water ourselves that belongs to SSLGC. And a clause in that is that if we bump into because the original agreement never expected either city to bump into its maximum take, half of the available water. And so that says if we bump into our half and our partner is not using their half, that we can then get excess off of their half as well.
So we do have the excess capacity. The other thing is, I like being a good neighbor. I really do. But why host it?
Well, we're not really using it. Selling it to them at retail would probably be a tad expensive for them. So, I mean, part of the retail piece of that, and the reason we're doing wholesale is so that they will raise the money for the day-to-day maintenance and all that of their distribution system within their developments as well. So it gives them a gap to be able to charge their normal rates that they charge their citizens and still be able to have a little money there to be able to finance and improve and maintain their infrastructure.
I just hope people recognize that we are being really, really good neighbors. Okay.
I believe they do.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
All right, council. Anyone down here? Mr. Crawford.
Mr. Wade, in the agreement you were talking about, Councilman Scagliola, didn't we also agree to allow Seguin to sell water to other cities out of their half, which reduces the amount we would have available if we wanted some?
That is correct.
Does that have a significant impact to what's...
They've recently entered into an agreement to sell up to 2,000 acre-feet a year to New Braunfels utilities. That is, I believe their plan is to start with river water and transition over to SSLGC water because of the interconnect. They're currently building some pipeline, both Seguin and New Braunfels, to be able to take water from New Braunfels. But again, much like this 400 acre-feet, that's not starting off at 2,000 acre-feet a year. It's starting off at a smaller amount and then growing to that 2,000 maximum. What's their take or pay? Yeah, I think their take or pay is 500 or 700 acre-feet.
But I know this is kind of a crystal ball question, but what does that sale do to the availability of water as we get closer to using more toward our 50% limit that we have? Do you have any idea? Does Alan know? Or?
Off the top of your head, come on up. You have off the top of your head what Seguin is using now out of their 5,500 acre-feet allotment?
I think they're using about 30% of 30% of the sales.
Okay.
So of the total sales.
So there's a 20% mark there.
Yeah.
And I believe, talking with Seguin leadership, by the time they get to 2,000 acre-feet with NBU, the Guadalupe field will be up and running. Matter of fact, we've had conversations about the agreement on the Guadalupe field and what does Seguin have to do to get into that in case they find other customers in their part of the county that want additional water. So we've been having those conversations back and forth about who's selling what to whom so that we make sure that we leave an adequate supply for our home cities.
My concerns are that intersection of the Guadalupe field, our increasing use from SSLGC, the sale of water on the Seguin side of the SSLGC project, and that intersection where that happens along with the Guadalupe field being on time and CVLGC being on time to help Cibolo. That's where my concern is. Other than that, if all that comes together at the right time, there is no concern. Everybody has water and we're good. We start thinking about the next 25 or 30 years, 10 years from now, or whatever it's going to be.
The one aspect that Mr. Waite mentioned was the surface water. Seguin has a little different from your Edwards water. Your Edwards water, you can sell that basically on the open water market to whoever needs those water rights. The surface water Seguin has, they have to take it at the Seguin water plant. That's where it's permitted. They cannot allow someone to take that water anywhere else. So basically, the Seguin water plant has to process that water and sell it. So as he mentioned, initially some of that water sales is going to be surface water from the Seguin water plant. I'm not sure how much. We weren't really involved in that, but that's going to be initially, and then that is a fallback that they have the surface water that they can't. They have 7,000 run-of-the-river rights, 7,000 acre-feet a year, and they're not using near that amount of the surface. So they have that available.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Mr.
Davis?
I share some of these concerns. I certainly want to be a good neighbor, and the agreement makes sense. I just have a concern that, in looking at the interlocal agreement, it's a 40-year agreement, and it says that this agreement will end on September 30th, 2059, unless extended or terminated. before that time is provided in this agreement. I really don't see anything in the agreement that allows for any reasonable method of termination. There's a line in here that says if we both agree to it, but the reality of it is they're buying 400 acre feet at a wholesale rate, which is good for them. And if we run into a problem, I'm not anticipating that we will, but if the city of Schertz does run into a problem, then this interlocal agreement does not give us any recourse to go back and say, of all the things that we're looking at providing water, here's an area that maybe we should not be doing. Because if we run into a problem, we go back to Cibolo and say, we're really tight right now. We really could use that 400 acre feet back for the next year or 2 or 3 until a well comes online or another pipeline gets built. Cibolo basically can say, no, we disagree. And under this agreement, we would still be required to provide them the 400 acre feet, which is at the expense of our water requirements. So I have concerns on that, again, I don't have a problem with a 4-year contract. I don't have a problem with giving them 400 acre feet. I don't have a problem with doing it at a wholesale rate. I understand all that. I just think that there's got to be a better option for the city of Schertz. I mean, we're being the nice neighbor here, the way I read this interlocal agreement. And as I'm checking the pros and cons, it's pro to our neighbor, pro to our neighbor, pro to our neighbor. And when it gets to if there's a problem, councils change. I mean, the current city folks that we talked about this with may feel that, oh yeah, if there's a problem in the future, don't worry, we'll back off and we'll resolve this. That may not be the case in 5 years or 6 years or 8 years or 10 years. So I mean, I do have a concern about the what if, and the what if is not to the benefit of Schertz with regards to our overall water requirements on the way this agreement's worded at the current point.
I think we'd be willing to sit down with Cibolo and see if they'd be willing to insert an out clause into this agreement. I personally don't know why they wouldn't. It's, a lot of folks when they're signing on for water, the other thing you can get into is a take or pay agreement. We didn't want to do that with Cibolo because it's a growing area for them, and they're going to end up taking the full 400, and we didn't want to put them on up front for some thing that would turn out to be a waste. But we're certainly welcome to talk to them about an out clause. I believe, as Mr. Crawford brought up, once we get to CVLGC, most of this will be moot. The question is, with CVLGC not being permitted and not plans moving forward to put holes in the ground, that we were looking at a longer-term contract so that their developers could have the confidence that there'd be water there for them as they continue to process their developments. I think we'd be willing to talk about an out clause in there. And to see what maybe is out there in other water contracts for out clauses. And then we could either under this bring that forward, Mr. James could sign that agreement, or we could bring it back to council if you'd like to do that.
If I may, Mayor, exactly. I mean, like I said, my concern is under the current vision and the current plan, we see no problems. But I've been around long enough to see that plans don't always go according to plan. And again, I certainly don't want to leave our neighbor in a lurch and say, hey, sorry, we changed our mind, we're going to close the valve off. But as these projects are being built, pipelines and drilling wells and stuff like that, if we become aware of a problem that's going to impact us, then I think we need to be able to sit down with anybody, whether it's someone that we're selling SAWS water to or SSLGC water to. We ought to have the ability to sit down with them and say, look, there's a issue here, and we've got to work a amicable solution out here, hopefully to the benefit of both parties. But at the end of the day, it's our water supply. And before I got on council and I sat out there, all I heard about was all the great things Schertz did with planning for the future for our water supply. Now to turn around and say, well, I've got a little bit extra now, I'm just going to give somebody else a good deal. Again, I don't mind being a good neighbor, but I think whatever agreement we build ought to have a clause or a feature that ultimately is to the benefit of the city. And again, whether it's a 1-year phase out, a 2-year phase out, but to go in there to a blanket 40-year agreement and say, basically, as long as both parties agree to it, we'll terminate it. I mean, again, if I was on the receiving side of that, I'd be saying, no, I'm getting 400 acre-feet of water every year for a darn good price. Figure out a way to manage the other water that you've got. And I don't think the residents of Schertz are going to want us to come back and say, okay, let's do a stage 1 water restriction. You can water your lawn once a month. Again, I don't have a problem in general with the agreement. I just think that a way to address or adjust this if a problem comes up. And again, I've been to enough briefings. I don't anticipate a problem. I'm an optimist, but again, things happen. So I mean, that's my 2 cents.
And council member, when you were speaking, you actually mentioned saws, which set off a memory in my head that I hadn't thought of. But so saws is a viable contention for us in times of emergency. So we've got 2 things in our arrangement with saws. The first one is that we can buy water out of the 12,000 acre feet they're shipping in our pipeline. We can buy that water from them when it comes out over here and send it up to our water plant. So that's one option we have. The bigger option, I think, for council security to know is that if we have something drastic happen, like if we blow up the pipeline as it runs under I-10, we're not going to get that fixed in 2 to 3 days. I mean, TxDOT's not going to allow that to happen. So in those cases, we have an arrangement with SAWS where we'll reverse the flow and we'll buy water from SAWS in San Antonio, bring it back down the pipeline to our water plant from the city of San Antonio. So we can do 2 things. We can buy excess water from them as it comes through, or if we can't get the water to us, which is the bigger danger in my mind with only one pipeline, and we're working on the redundancy to that. But if that pipeline blows up tonight, then we can turn around tomorrow and SAWS can reverse flow and sell us water back, and we won't run out of water. So that is another security blanket. It doesn't fix this problem. And like I said, I'm willing to talk to the city of Cibolo about that. It'd be interesting to see council's perspective, because I think it would be roughly the same language with the exception of the out clause. I'm willing to talk to them about putting the out clause in, and then would council want our acting city manager to go ahead and sign that at that time, or would he be comfortable doing that, or would you like us to come back to council for a second consideration?
I'd like to see some version of myself personally, I'd like to see some version of an out clause, and I'd like to see it come back before council.
Mr. Larson.
I hate to muddy the waters, but it just seems some of this discussion is pretty myopic. These interlocal agreements are not exclusively one way from Schertz to neighboring communities. They go both ways, and I can imagine you coming with an option for something that we needed, saying, hey, we've got a development that's on the border of a city that is going to spur development in both communities, and the developers need 40 years of reassurance, and Cibolo said, oh, we're going to be a great, good, really nice neighbor, you're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome, but if at any time it's no longer beneficial to us, never mind. I don't think I would ever personally enter into an agreement like that. Hey, I just really want to help you out. Why don't you, I'll give you a discount on my car. Just know if I get a flat tire, I get to use it. It's not, maybe a little bit less patting ourselves on the back for being a good neighbor there. There's economic development going there that wants 40 years of assurances because they're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into developing on the border of our own community, while the development being built currently that's looking for the water assurances probably is not going to be a direct tax basis benefit to the community of Schertz. That entire region of Schertz is going to be spurred by the development of those projects. And you've already given multiple ways that we could solve a problem that would come up from us having a shortage of water. And so we're obsessing on the thimble of water we're looking to sell Cibolo in a basic, ordinary interlocal agreement. When we have 1,000 ways to make up that thimble and the 1% chance that something terrible happens, I think it's kind of an exercise in absurdity. I think the agreement looks good. I think we should take a step back and maybe see the entire picture of what the economic development in that region means, how there's interlocal agreements that go both ways between each community, how we've already got a team of experts who have looked at not one, not two, but 3 contingency plans in case the agreement it turns out to be an area where we have a 1% chance of a very, very, very minor short-term issue. So I know it's difficult for staff when council's saying 2 different things, but I think maybe council should take a step back at the big picture and realize that with the contingency plans that have been communicated here, the team that manages our water resources has considered these, has answered these, and there really doesn't appear to be any legitimate concern in that regard.
I don't know, Mr. Larson, I count at least 3 different opinions I've heard so far on this one. Anyone else? Mr. James, you had something you'd like to add, sir?
Sure. So maybe let me offer this up from some of the discussions that staff had beforehand going into this and how we sort of view it to kind of clarify. I know there's been some discussion about the wholesale rate and maybe the view that seems like we're giving them a good deal. It's only a good deal if we consider it's not the retail rate. It's not what we charge that has all of the other kind of infrastructure to it. But it's not really a discounted rate. In fact, we went and did a study to say if we have an entity that is going to sell this water to someone else, we effectively said, let's figure out what rate we need to see it so that we are not, in fact, subsidizing their usage. And that was the point of that retail rate, or that was, in fact, the point of that wholesale rate. Additionally, then we said, well, there are those other costs to maintain our system that effectively it has to go through. And so I think that was the additional charge. So while it's not the retail rate, I think maybe to be clear, I don't think it's appropriate to view it as a discounted rate or giving them a good deal on water. We effectively said if we have another entity that needs water from us that they are going to redistribute, what's the appropriate rate so that we're not subsidizing them, and what's the additional charge that goes on to that. So for what it's worth, that's the case. I think the larger issue, and I think it's a valid point of view, is water these days particularly is a very, very valuable resource. It's in short supply. We just heard a number of presentations about the cost of providing that water service going up, both operationally and water rights and things like that. And I think I will say this, I think we have valid points of view from a more conservative approach about worried about running late or running short. Do we need the ability of an out clause, and those to say, maybe we don't. I think it's a valid discussion. I think that's the most valid thing to look at. So keep in mind this, there is benefit to our customers to be able to sell excess water that we don't need today. That is of value to us because effectively we're paying for that infrastructure that provides for that capacity for it to be available. And so essentially if we don't use it, we're having to pay for all the stuff that goes. And so effectively maybe the opposite is I'd look at it, if we are able to sell excess water we don't need, and I've not heard opposition to that, there is value to us. What I've heard is a concern that, are we sure we're not going to run short and then we're going to regret this decision down the road? And again, I think that's a valid perspective. And so part of where the discussions on this is to try to balance how risk averse we are, how concerned are we, do we think that we would run short? And I think where staff kind of came down is, if we were to have that, there are some options to kind of deal with it. I think part of how we looked at it is we are in partnership in part with Cibolo on CVLGC. So while they may have different water sources, our interests are a bit aligned that if there's a shortage of water, likely Cibolo will feel that as well, and we will continue our efforts with CVLGC going forward. And then this is really the thing, because again, that still may say, yeah, great, but we need an out clause. We're a little more risk averse. One of the things that we can go back and have that conversation with Cibolo on is, to some degree, their need to be able to count on this water or the ability to tap this water for their users, that their development needs, the future residents, the commercial projects that come online. And so if we're risk averse to the point, reasonably so, to say, I need an out clause, and I need an out clause that has a short enough window, i.e. I notify you at this point, and for X number of months or years, you can keep taking, but at that point you have to cut short. then what Cibolo will have to do reasonably is they've got to assume probably worst case scenario that could happen. City of Schertz could say we need to, and they then need to make other provisions for that. And so again, we may say that's a bit on them, but understand that provision that we may view as sort of that reasonable on our part, and I think it is, has a significant impact on them and may affect their actions going forward to cause them to say, I may need to do this now for a timing concern, but we then immediately need to turn around and start making arrangements to serve ourselves, which the challenge may be is that we may find that in 2 years, 3 years, they say, okay, we're turning off because we had to make provision for that. We find ourselves in that situation of having the excess water and the lack of subsidy. So again, keep in mind, and we can go have that conversation and see where it comes back, but the thing maybe to keep in mind if this item is delayed for us to go do that is it may put Cibolo in the position of saying, reasonable enough, City of Schertz, for you to have that out clause, but then we need to act reasonably and assume worst case that may happen. And so effectively they make provision to serve just to not face that situation. So just something to think about as you go forward. And we may still say, yeah, that's fine, I understand, we help them out for a bit, 3 years, but unfortunately it's so bad if we run short that we forego a bit of revenue, and that's a rational decision weighing the pros and cons, but just something to think about.
Anyone else? A couple thoughts. So I heard you say that we're not entering into a take-or-pay agreement with Cibolo. This is strictly they pay for what they take. Understand, too, that not to confuse analogy with metaphor, because I'm not terribly well educated on the difference, but if we own an orchard and we have a tree that's bearing fruit, but we're not using or eating or selling that fruit, it's just sitting there. If we happen to find a market to sell that fruit and it can reduce the cost of our overall operation of our orchard, or for our co-owners, as it were, of that orchard, then we have an opportunity to offset those costs. Similarly, not exactly, with what we have before us with Cibolo. As far as being a good neighbor, they need the water. That's why we entered into an agreement with them in 2015. I think it's a fair and reasonable agreement that's been put before us. I understand the risk aversion. I understand the maybe we need a little more for the city of Schertz on this one. Maybe we need to be even a better neighbor and give a bit more on the Cibolo side. But I would argue that given the arrangement that we have with SAWS, it is not an unlimited amount of water, but it's virtually that. Having met with SAWS myself over the last several years, understanding the cost that they have in the huge new pipeline that they're building and their desire to sell water to us should we ever be in the need of it in order to offset their costs, puts us in a very strong position to be able to import water should we have a catastrophic event, or in fact multiple catastrophic events with regard to our water. For example, not just having a pipeline break, having a new Post Oak landfill going in over our water supply and contaminating it, right? While not all eventualities have been considered, a large number of variables have been considered over the last, call it 15, 16 years since we embarked on this project to provide our own water. So I would ask the council, if you have further comment, to make it after I wrap up and see if we can come to consensus on what we want staff to do. I think the agreement as written, are there pros and cons? Absolutely. Is there some level of risk to the city that we could potentially run short? Absolutely. I think there's also a risk the legislature could pass laws where they confiscate all of the water systems in the state and take them over themselves. That's a risk too. I don't think it's very likely. I don't think it's very likely, given our current position, that we would ever be run short and not be able to recover. That said, everyone on the council does need to realize that if we do decide that we want to purchase water from SAWS, we will do so at a premium. It will not be inexpensive. It will be very costly for us to do that, and we would hope that we would only have to do that for a very short time. It is not an inexpensive solution at all. Is it one that will work in an emergency? Of course. not at all inexpensive. So that said, I would ask for any further comments from council and look for consensus so we can give clear direction to staff as to how we'd like to go forward. Anything else? Dr. Scagliola.
Yeah, when I asked a question about capacity, I knew the answer. Edwards Aquifer. I know we never use all of our capacity there. We always set aside like 1,000 acres or so. That's been traditional in the past. So I'm not so worried about our capacity. I understand the need for the 40-year agreement. Developers really can't start turning dirt unless they have a guaranteed supply of water for 40 years. So yeah, there are a couple of pros and cons to this, but generally, I don't see a problem with this. I'm going to keep in mind that sometimes we do sell water at wholesale. I'm going to keep that in mind. I'm just going to warn you right now, because sometimes people are out or have a definite need for water and they don't want to pay retail rate. But that's for another day. I'll make a motion that we approve resolution number 18R93.
Second.
I've got a motion from Dr. Scagliola, a second from Mr. Gutierrez. Other comments, questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Nay. Aye.
Aye.
I have 5 ayes and 1 nay. The motion carries. All right, next item that we have on the agenda this evening is item number 9, Ordinance 18F16. On first reading, an ordinance of the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, granting an electric transmission and distribution and communications franchise to the Guadalupe Valley Electric Cooperative, Incorporated, for the use of city streets, alleys, and public ways for a 10-year term commencing on the effective date, containing various terms and conditions with regard to the grant of such franchise, containing a severability clause, providing for the superseding of any and all kinds of ordinances, regulations, rules, or policies that are in conflict with this ordinance, and providing an effective date. Mr. Waite?
Yes, sir. Mayor, members of council, back on April 27th, we came for a first reading of this ordinance once before. And what we did was it was time to renew the agreement with GVEC, the franchise agreement, for them to use our right-of-ways for the provision of electrical service. That we'd had an agreement with them for multiple years prior. There was a lot of changes in the new agreement because technology has changed. So now not only do they want to deliver electricity, but they'd also like to deliver fiber optic internet capacity, and then they wanted to incorporate their street light agreement into the actual franchise agreement and not have it be its own separate document. And so staff went through it, engineering, public works, and myself went through it and brought it before council. Council approved it on first reading, and we turned it over to GVEC to review. And GVEC did some reviewing. They had some concerns. They worked intently with Mr. Santee, who was always Johnny on the spot of getting their information back to them. Sometimes staff, myself in particular, was a little bit slow in responding to some questions they had. But we have come up with an agreement that both GVEC believes they can support, and there's not been too many drastic changes from what we saw last time. There's been some indemnity language changed and modified to the pleasure of both legal counsels of both organizations. I think was probably the biggest change in the agreement. We were able to work out a deal on streetlights that if in the previous version GVEC had said, if there's an area where there's no longer a need for streetlights, that GVEC could remove those. Council may remember the only streetlights that the city of Schertz is responsible for in the GVEC service area are the ones in the center of Schertz Parkway from Wiederstein Road down to FM 78. The rest of them GVEC provides to us as a part of their franchise. And so they had a clause in there that said, hey, if there's an area where we don't think we need a street light, we'd like the ability to remove it. And what we added back in was tell the city, because if it's an area we feel we need that for security or whatever reasons, we still want to illuminate that area, then there's a clause now in the franchise that would allow us to take over that street light and pay for it, as opposed to them pulling it out because they're the ones holding the expense for it. So anyway, we got that hammered out. We were going to come to council for a second reading, but part of a franchise agreement is that we have to have a publication. According to the charter, we have to publish this for the general public to see for a certain period after the other half of the franchise agreement has approved it. GVEC's board is meeting, I think they met today. I've not heard whether or not they've approved it, but it was on their agenda to approve for today. And then the other piece of our charter that we ran into was a 90-day period that is required between first and second reading, and there was not going to be enough time to get that 90-day period met after we do the publication. So we're back tonight to do a first reading. GVEC, we should have their approval in the morning. Then we'll do the publication, and if that publication goes off timely, then we'll be back on August 7th for the second reading.
All right, very good. Council questions for Mr. Waite? Mr. Crawford?
Mr. Waite, did I understand that one of the changes was GVEC can decide that a light isn't needed, that they maintain, and then they have to come to us and see if we want to start maintaining it?
Yeah, no, we have to get our approval to remove it.
Okay. So if they don't get our approval, then they have to keep the light there and maintain it and provide the lighting coverage. Is that a way to look at it or not?
No, if they feel it isn't needed and plan to remove it, then and they'll bring it to us. If we want it to stay there for whatever,
then we have to pay for it.
We'll take over the full.
So they could technically force us to take some lights that they're paying for and have us pay for them. Is that a way to look at it? I doubt that would happen.
So the terms are areas where there's no longer development or no need for street lights. So it's they couldn't just say, hey, we're not going to pay for, we want to pull all the lights out of Savannah Square. They couldn't do that because there's houses there and people living there. You know, if there was a street that we had plenty of street lights on, but there'd been no development for, say, 8 years, and they said, really, can we put these back when the developer comes in and builds here? And we said, no, we'd really like it illuminated because we have a lot of criminal activity there, then we would pay for those.
Is that put them back piece in the agreement if the development came?
So
the example you just used.
Street lights and how they're put in and when they're put in are at the request of development in the new areas of town.
So if they took some out on your example you just gave, and then 2 years later they put them back when the land got developed. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Wade, do you have any feeling for, are there any conflicts with any other franchises with the changes that have been made that would be made if we enter into this agreement?
Not that I'm aware of. You know, there's not a ton of substantial changes to this. We don't, I believe, hold the franchise for cable anymore, but I don't believe that was a single use anyway because we have multiple cable providers in the city. Right. And I don't believe, I guess GVC could provide cable services, but they're more interested in the internet capacity and being able to provide internet for folks.
That's the only question that I had. I just want to make sure that we manage our franchises with equity. Anyone else? If not, is there a motion to approve Ordinance 18F16?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion for Mr. Gutierrez, a second for Mr. Larson. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 6 ayes and no nays. The motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening is item number 10, Resolution 18R85. A resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, calling an election to be held on November 6, 2018 for the purpose of electing council members for Place 6 and Place 7 for a 3-year term and making provision for the conduct of the election, authorizing contracts with the elections administrators of Bexar and Guadalupe counties to conduct this election, authorizing the election to be held as a joint election, resolving other matters incident and related to such election, and declaring an effective date. Mrs. Dennis.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor, Council, City Manager, Mr. James, executive staff, and citizens. The resolution before you calls the November joint general election to elect council members in places 6 and 7 for a 3-year term to begin November 2018, ending 2021. By contracting with Guadalupe counties, Guadalupe and Bexar counties, we receive several different types of benefits. We will divide the cost between the entities that are also holding elections. We will utilize common early voting places and election day poll locations. We'll utilize common, equipment. It will reduce voter confusion. The action on this item will authorize staff to finalize the agreements with Bexar and Guadalupe County and their respective election administrators to conduct our city election, as well as approve a joint contract with the other entities. Guadalupe County Commissioners Court has already met and approved the early voting locations and election vote centers. Yes, again, Guadalupe County will have vote centers on Election Day, which means Guadalupe County voters can go to any one of those vote centers and vote on Election Day. They don't have to go to precincts. Once Bexar County meets with the Commissioners Court, they will issue their final results for the early voting Election Day, and our office will have that information and get it out to the citizens. The cost for the election is estimated at $36,357, and as customary, election information will be posted on the city's website as soon as we receive, and anyone who has any questions can call our office. Filing began yesterday and continues until Monday, August 30th at 5 p.m. Early voting begins Monday, October 22nd and goes through Friday, November 2nd. All this information will be on the city website. We will publish this information in the Schertz magazine. I would like to take this moment to thank Patty Horan. Our election notice also has to be published in Spanish, and since I don't know how to do that, I've been working with her, that team effort. She has helped me tremendously, and that is going to be published, but I do want to publicly thank her. Staff recommends approval of this resolution. Any questions?
Questions, council? Mr. Crawford.
What were you saying about Comal County? Because they're not in this contract, right? That'll be done separately?
No, Comal County, if you remember, the Guadalupe County gets with Comal County and runs that part of our election.
Those election officials work together, not
that is correct.
To our city, right?
That is correct.
Okay, nothing changed there.
We do not do a separate contract with Comal County.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Not, is there a motion to approve 18R85?
So moved. Second.
Motion from Mr. Davis, second from Mr. Gutierrez. Any other comments, questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
6 ayes and no nays. The motion carries. Thank you, Mrs. Dennis.
Thank you.
All right, the next item we have on the agenda this evening is item number 11, Ordinance 18M25, an ordinance by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, amending the City of Schertz Code of Ordinances and certain other ordinances by amending and establishing fees for certain licenses, permits, and other services provided by the City of Schertz. Mr. Walters, good evening, sir.
Good evening. Let's see. Get rid of that top. All right, so you have the fee recommendations in front of you. I would like to go through fairly quickly the list of changes to the fee schedule that staff has proposed. The majority of these fees were referenced before in our previous discussions. There's only a couple that have changed since then, and I will touch on those specifically as well. The first up is the library. So the return postage fee, this is for a interlibrary loan order. So we requested an item from another library, paid for the postage to get it here, and then the item's never picked up. And then we have to turn around and mail it back, and the item was never used. So staff had this fee before, removed it, and would like to put this back in the fee schedule, try to encourage individuals that actually request books, because that kind of takes the item out of, not only it takes the item out of circulation an entire another library, so we want to try to reinforce the fact that if you use the program, you need to get the book and make use of it. Otherwise, you're just taking it from somebody else that may want to use that the item. On the Schertz magazine, removal of the front and inside front cover and inside back cover. We have a lot of trouble actually renting out that space, and also is very expensive because it is on a cover. So what staff is proposing to do is remove those fees and that opportunity for the public or companies to actually rent those spaces and instead use that for city information. Under the event facilities, before we had a kitchen fee, also called a capital recovery fee. So it was $1 per person that we would charge for an event that would use the kitchen in order to collect some money to replace future equipment and facilities in the kitchen. So if you use the kitchen, you got charged this extra fee, and that money would go back to actually repair and upgrade the kitchen as it starts to wear down. The $1 per person was actually very hard to calculate both for us and for the renter, so we opted to go for a flat fee based on the room that was used. So if you use the ballroom, it would go to a $200 fee. If you go to just a blue bonnet cutoff area, it'd be just a $75 flat kitchen fee. And again, the proceeds would still be set aside and used for kitchen equipment replacement. The trade show electrical fee has been removed, and then the city employee 25% discount has been removed as well. Also highlighted in here is the nonprofit 25% discount. We wanted a moment of clarification on that, and we're still coming up with sort of a comp policy that will come back to council at a future date for reference. But that's just a clarification. No change currently is being recommended. Another area in the event facilities is the Friday rental rates. So we noticed that the rental rates on Friday were not as high as, let's say, Saturday or the other days in the week, even though we were previously charging a Saturday rate for that. Looking around the community, we noticed some other communities actually charge a Sunday rate for Friday in an effort to boost the amount of events we have on Fridays. We lowered that rate to the Sunday rate. Under the fire department, we talked about adding a fire watch fee. That would be a fee that could be requested of the city of Schertz, or service could be requested from the city of Schertz. So if a commercial hotel building is their fire alarm system is down, per our codes and ordinances, we require someone to be on fire watch. So someone stationed there to walk around the halls and make sure their fire doesn't start, and basically be the fire alarm system in lieu of an automated one. So what we have done is the fire watch fee will actually provide a firefighter to go into the business and provide that service, and if they don't want to post one of their own employees to do it, which they can. But if they request an actual firefighter to come in and provide the service, we will charge them the actual cost of the service, which will be the weighted salary of the firefighter, times the number of hours he is on site. Under the planning and zoning, they plan to remove the time extension fee and the second and subsequent development review fees per quarter hour. A time extension fee is currently actually not allowed, and the second subsequent reviews has never been really requested. If it goes long enough, they'll just have to refile anyway, and it comes with another review at that time. One of the new is a legal requirement, so if there's an improvement agreement that actually needs us to have a legal review of the agreement, we would be able to pass along that additional legal cost the city would incur to have that agreement reviewed. And then the appeals and requests for amendments, we're adding in that list of boards, commissions, and council, the new Building and Standards Commission. So if they want to request an appeal, they would be charged the rate they would charge to any of the other boards and commissions, charged by to hear from them. Under inspections, one that we hadn't talked about before was the swimming pool above ground permits. We're recommending we remove and delete that fee. A couple of housekeeping items are the garage sale permits. We actually removed the need for that fee earlier, and so we're actually removing from the fee schedule, so it no longer shows up there. There's also a clarification, so no permit fees will be charged for sites located on Main Street, and that includes all departments, not just what's listed under the inspections tab. So no permit fees for any department will be charged for those sites. As a clarification, that was currently the practice and that was the intent. But to make that clear on the fee schedule, we changed up that language a little bit. Also removed, that was not mentioned before, so additional permit copies and duplicate license registrations. Those are hardly requested and they're such a low dollar amount, it's very easy for us to just print another one up and send it to them, either scan it and send it to them or have them pick up another paper copy. So those fees are recommended to be removed. And then the administrative fee for a cancellation of permit, again, not a whole lot of dollar amount or cause or need for this, and any sort of administrative fee for this could be rolled into any other future permitting fees if we look at ever raising those fees in the future. Any final adjustment was removing of the GIS tab from the schedule. That will from now on be dictated by the open records requests fees that are laid out in the administrative code, which were the same as what we had to have charged if they had done it. It was just mocked up in a different one, but we only get one, maybe two requests a year. So breaking it out in a whole other section of the fee schedule felt just kind of complicated and made it unnecessarily longer. Throughout the rest of the changes, we heard tonight some of the proposed utility costs on rates coming in. We will use those rates that council reviewed tonight and see if we need to update the utility fees for the city of Schertz with this new information, and those will be brought back at a later date. Those are the changes, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or look to the department heads if they have any.
Very good. Council, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, just one quick thing. If you look in the total fee schedule that was in our packet, on page 9, where we talk about the Civic Center, there's still 2 lines in there that I think are vague enough that probably need to get addressed. Thank you for bringing that up. Multiple day renters, 25% discount, total rent 2 or more days. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sitting next to one, but I would argue that somebody could make the argument that if they come in one day and say, I want to rent it for this Friday and next Friday, this month, I would qualify for a 25% discount. So I think the intent there, if I'm reading this right, is somebody that wants to come in and get it for a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I would say insert the word consecutive between more and days. And I mentioned this before, I have a problem with the line above it, frequent renters, events occurring multiple times during the month, week, or year. I see a big difference between someone comes in and says, I want to rent it every Friday this month and qualifying for a discount, or somebody that comes in and says, I'd like to rent it the first Friday of this month and the first Friday in October. That's twice this year. That makes me a frequent renter. I think if we're going to give a discount, I think we need to qualify what that means with regards, and I'm not against a discount for somebody that wants to use our facility and plan something out like a quarterly event or a monthly event, but I think we need to clarify that language a little bit better in the fee schedule.
We can do that before we come back next time. Take a crack at it. Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Okay. If there's nothing else, is there a motion to approve Ordinance 18M25?
So moved. Second.
A motion from Mr. Larson. I have a second from Dr. Scagliola. Before I call for a vote, Mr. James, you'll make those changes and have those ready for us before final reading?
Yes, sir. Well, we assume that motion to approve is with those changes brought up when staff taking a crack at the other.
Again, when we come back for final reading, if you just highlight those changes so council has an opportunity to look at those. All right, anything else from council? Comments, questions? If not, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 6 ayes and no nays, the motion carries. Next item we have on the, thank you, Mr. Walters. Next item we have on the agenda is item number 12, Resolution 18R73, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, approving employee policies related to employee separation, determining salaries and filling position vacancies and other matters in connection therewith.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. If you'll recall, we were here in May, towards the end of May, with seeking direction on a couple of personnel policies, namely, as you mentioned, relating to how we fill position vacancies, how we determine salaries, and then also end of employment and the separation processes and procedures. We took the input that we received from y'all. We solicited feedback from staff through our policy team meetings. We sent them through legal, had them run the traps on it. And so what you have before you tonight is that version that has, like I said, hopefully incorporated any and all input that we got from y'all as well as staff, and then with legal review. So I am happy to answer any questions that you have tonight about these policies.
Very good. Council, questions on these? If not, is there a motion to approve Resolution 18R73?
Mayor, I had one question.
Dr. Kaiser?
On the policy for relationships and fraternization, I just had one question where you had the violation of the policy, either transfer to the manager or supervisor or disciplinary action. Is there an option for the employee to change, departments or not? Is it only the supervisor?
I'm sorry, Dr. Kaiser, which policy are you speaking to?
The handout here. It is the interpersonal relationships and fraternization.
Okay, so what you're asking is there an opportunity for the employee to transfer?
Right.
If there is an open position vacant for which they're qualified, then we would certainly look to make an accommodation where we were able to.
Because in here it just says the violation is either transfer of the manager or supervisor or disciplinary action for the manager or supervisor.
Yes, ma'am. And in a separate policy regarding transfers, it does speak to the process that we'll follow in looking for an open, authorized vacant position for which they're qualified, and we would make that transfer again as we were able to.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone else? Again, is there a motion to approve 18R73?
So move.
Second.
I have a motion from Dr. Scagliola, a second from Dr. Kaiser. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
6 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item we have on the agenda this evening is item 13, which is also a public hearing. It's Ordinance 18S24, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, amending Part 3 Schertz Code of Ordinances, the Unified Development Code, or UDC, Articles 9 and 16, to amend certain site design standards for public water and wastewater facilities, repealing all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance, providing a severability clause, and providing an effective date. Gentlemen? So for anybody that might be with us for the first time or not seen us have a public hearing in a while, we'll have some commentary and setup from staff. Then we'll have a public hearing, and after the public hearing is closed, we will open things up for the City Council.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As was mentioned, we're bringing some amendments to the UDC Articles 9 and 16. So Article 9 involves site design standards, and those were developed for the UDC with commercial and multifamily use in mind, and didn't really take into consideration public water and wastewater facilities. And so during the development of some recent capital improvement projects that engineering staff has been working on, we identified several requirements in Article 9 of the UDC that are in conflict with goals that we see in those facilities. And those are specifically with regard to buffering, landscaping, tree planting, and architectural requirements. So in the past, those conflicts had to be carried through in variances that had to be prepared by both planning and engineering staff, presented to the appropriate boards and commissions. Through a series of meetings with the planning staff and the engineering staff, we came up with what we wanted to propose as those amendments that we often see needing variances for public water and wastewater facilities. Again, these are only limited to, the changes you see are only limited to public water and wastewater facilities. So we had taken the recommended amendments to the Planning and Zoning Commission the first time on April 25th, and then again on May 9th. And in both of those instances, there was some good discussion, and both of those, the item was actually tabled for staff to come up with some answers and to revise things slightly. Also out of the May 9th meeting, it was requested that we create a subcommittee that would meet on May 23rd with a few members of P&Z to go over things in more detail than what was allowed during the time of a normal P&Z meeting. On June 13th, we went again to P&Z and had a workshop with the whole commission to go over each item another time to make sure everybody was understanding the amendments that were being proposed. And then on June 27th, P&Z recommended approval with a 6 to nothing vote of approval. Wanted to just real quick run through just a couple of high level of the summary that were summary of the proposed changes. Put first, the only change to Article 16 is adding a definition to what a public water and wastewater facility actually is. That definition doesn't exist, and so this is the definition that we came up with. It's important to start with this since these changes only apply to facilities that meet these requirements. So it's for any reservoirs, towers, tanks, pump stations, or other related appurtenances used for the purpose of providing potable water or wastewater utility service, occupiable space is not considered a part of the public water and or wastewater facility. So the important last sentence there is if the facility has another use that requires an occupiable structure, that portion of the site would still be required to meet the architectural requirements, landscaping requirements. What we're really focused on here is the utility type portions of the site, such as tanks and things like that. So just a few of the high-level items that we're proposing to amend in Article 9. The architectural requirements, so those are the exterior design requirements. Those are being amended. The landscaping requirements, which gets into the site planting requirements, and then the screening and fencing, and this gets into reducing that buffer, the landscaping buffer, and installing an 8-foot masonry wall around these facilities to provide that screening around the entire site. And then that last item, Article 9, there's just some general cleanup in the tree preservation and mitigation section that was just a clerical mistake from some previous amendments that were made. And so we caught those as we were going through Article 9, so that's thrown in there as a cleanup item, not necessarily related to these facilities. And that's all I had for the public hearing.
All right, very good. At this time, we will move to the public hearing portion of this item. If you'd like to speak before the council on this matter, we invite you to come forward and ask that you state your name and address for the record for the city secretary to capture, and ask that you keep your commentary to roughly 3 minutes. Of course, being the chair, I've got a little bit of leeway to let it go a little longer if you need to. But at this time, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Anybody who would like to come forward and address the council may do so at this time. Appears that I have no takers. Long, awkward pause. If there are no takers, I'll go ahead and close public hearing. All right, council, questions that you have for staff. Mr. Larson.
I actually have kind of some in-depth questions. If you can go back to the page 2 slide, just so I would like, just for the matter of record, for you to go into a little bit more detail about the changes that you've requested on the architectural requirements, landscaping requirements, and screening and fencing, and why those are not compatible with the facilities.
Okay. So the exterior construction, and Bryce will probably step in on a couple of these as well to help out. So the exterior construction design standards, these we're actually exempting public water and wastewater facilities from this entire section. These get into requirements of articulating exteriors of structures and things like that. And these facilities have water tanks, electrical buildings, pump houses, things like that end up being a burden and are kind of unnecessary elements in these utilitarian type facilities, and Bryce might be able to.
Sure. So one issue we ran into about 2 years ago now at Homestead up north, they installed a lift station at the public lift station. We had to run a variance because they had a covered structure that was screening the mechanical equipment for the pumps that are underground. None of this, except for the roof, can be seen from the public view because it's all enclosed in an 8-foot masonry wall. And so there was no reason to build it to our current standards, which would be masonry columns for that kind of structure, kind of these higher standards. It's a screening portion that the only reason it exists is to cover the electrical panel. And so it doesn't serve that inherent purpose. So we have those requirements for items that are in public view or that can be seen from neighboring properties, because the standard that council has set is this higher quality development with masonry materials, windows, articulations, these things that provide visual interest. As staff worked through with engineering and we've worked through this portion, we identified that for the most part on these facilities, these things don't need to comply with these requirements. We also ran a second variance, as I'm thinking about it, to the CCMA existing OJR plant, where they have a what I will just call a waste press building. They have a big press that compacts the semi-dried sludge, and as they go through this drying process, it creates a very messy environment. And they had requested this because all of the masonry finishes that we have, none of them could be treated in a way that would cause it to be completely unporous and easy to be cleaned, so it was a sanitary issue. And so as we look at this and the way we crafted this requirement, staff feels that the buildings that are truly not habitable, occupiable buildings, but are these small mechanical buildings that are these small covered areas for these electrical panels or equipment panels, there's not a reason for them to comply with this higher masonry standard when there's a different material that is both more practical and more usable for that. And so that's where we came with that portion.
So I guess to make sure I'm understanding that the regulations that we have for everyone else in architectural requirements were too onerous, burdensome, and costly to be applied to public buildings.
So
let me maybe try this, Councilman. Let me try this, Bryce, because we spent a lot of time with this, and I think maybe where you're going is there is a lot of concern from a staff perspective that if we're going to impose development regulations on the private sector, so architectural standards, landscape requirements, tree preservation requirements, things like that, if we're willing to impose it on somebody else, then we ought to be willing to comply with it ourselves. And I think that's a valid perspective, and I think when we've built public buildings and are going to build public buildings such as the fire station, we feel that makes sense, and yeah, we should comply with that. Sort of what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I think fundamentally the issue here is when we looked at these water and wastewater facilities is it's a bit of they are what they are. This is a utility substation that inherently I think staff felt like we want to make sure that those are attractive facilities that don't negatively impact the adjacent properties, but that the standards we have that might apply to an office building, an apartment complex, a retail shopping center don't necessarily get us a more positive standard if we were to apply the current standards that we've got. So it wasn't a matter of it doesn't make sense. It's at the end of the day, if I've got a pump house building, it is still a pump house building, and that articulating that pump house building because of its size and nature and function and all of the other accoutrements that occur on site with regard to pumps and pipes and equipment and things like that, we didn't feel like that added to the aesthetics of the project. And so we felt like to some degree we have to balance being good stewards of tax money. And so if we're putting additional money into it, which is what it comes down to, maybe that's an honest answer, but we don't feel like it adds any value to the public, then we didn't feel it made sense to do that. And I think to some degree we started this a number of years ago when we made modifications to the architectural standards and came up with not a one-size-fits-all, but rather with here are multiple ways to do an industrial building, but the industrial standard is very different than a retail building standard or an office standard because at the end of the day, it's still an industrial building. And we're not trying to put a bunch of money into it and have it look like a faux building. I think the same thing applies a little bit with regard to the landscape site. Inherently, the nature of these facilities require a lot of pipe and a lot of equipment and access to those things going forward. And so to some degree, the dressing up with landscaping doesn't make sense because of the conflicts between those two things. And so our feeling is, and this really kind of comes down to it, if there's a concern that the water and wastewater facilities that are being built in our community, either by the city of Schertz or frankly by a partner agency such as CCMA or SSLGC, are negatively impacting adjacent properties through the aesthetics, then really the decision is how do we take this thing that's inherently a water or wastewater facility and not have it negatively impact. And likely the things that we would do to improve that are not the standards that would apply to an office building. It's entirely different things that we would do, in part because we have some challenges with regard to security requirements, TCEQ requirements, and things like that. And so from our perspective, it wasn't about not good for goose. It's frankly, if it doesn't make sense to do it, let's not require it. And I think that is a mindset and a mantra that we would apply to commercial development and residential development as well. If we have an ordinance or standard, the code, that doesn't further the benefit, then let's pull it back, let's adjust it, let's go forward. And so I'd say we compare it more a bit like what we did with school facilities, that typically in a residential neighborhood, while we may get some complaints about traffic, they're viewed as beneficial. And everybody goes, yeah, it's a school. You got parts of schools and things of schools, and it's a school is a school. Why make it something it's not? So perhaps that helps. We can still go through the list, but assuming where I think you were coming from, that was the intent, not what's good for them isn't good for us.
Well, of course, Brian knows me too well, and he stole my fun. But ultimately, I think the point that I'd like to make on this still remains, although I'd like to learn a little bit more about the 8-foot masonry wall, because if we're amending that, but then one of the reasons we didn't have to do the other regulations was because the 8-foot masonry wall hid it from view, I'd like to dig into that. But I think it's an opportunity for me to pontificate on the reality that every developer can make an argument as to what is beneficial to the community depending on their particular development. The only difference is when we make that argument, we get to change the rules for ourselves. And so I think anytime we come into a position where we're finding that complying with our own rules is too burdensome or not necessarily sensible, it's a great opportunity to leverage that and maybe dig into that same line of thought across the spectrum, and maybe find a way where we can deregulate some of the requirements that don't work for us, because a lot of times they're not working for other developments for the same reasons, or they're burdensome or unnecessary in the same way. And so wanting to stay on this particular change, I think it's important that if we're going to consider making this change for all of the valid reasons that Mr. James indicated, we should know that those same arguments apply to non-government development, and it may mean if we've found it necessary to review these for ourselves, it may mean that there's an opportunity to take that same work and mindset and apply these for looking for ways we can deregulate for other industries and development as well.
Anyone else? All right, if not, is there a motion to approve 18S24?
So move.
Second.
A motion from Dr. Scagliola, a second from Dr. Kaiser. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Nay.
I have 5 ayes and 1 nay. The motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
Mayor, who made the second? I'm sorry. Who seconded that motion?
Dr. Kaiser.
Thank you.
All right, next item we have on the agenda this evening, we have a roll call vote confirmation on items 1 through 13.
Consent agenda items 1 through 4. Motion was made by Councilmember Davis, seconded by Councilmember Crawford. Dr. Scagliola, Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Kaiser, Dr. Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 5, resolution number 18R86. Motion was made by Dr. Kaiser, seconded by Councilmember Crawford. Dr. Scagliola, Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Dr. Kaiser, Councilmember Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 6, resolution 18R87. Motion was made by Dr. Scagliola, seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez. Dr. Scagliola, Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Dr. Kaiser, Councilmember Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 7, resolution number 18R29. Motion was made by Dr. Scagliola, seconded by Councilmember Davis. Dr. Scagliola, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Crawford, and Dr. Kaiser voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 8, resolution number 18R93. Motion was made by Dr. Scagliola, seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez. Dr. Scagliola, Council members Gutierrez, Larson, Dr. Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. Councilmember Davis voted no. Motion passed. Item number 9, ordinance number 18F16 on first reading. Motion was made by Councilmember Gutierrez, seconded by Councilmember Larson. Dr. Scagliola, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Dr. Kaiser, Councilmember Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 10, resolution number 18R85. Motion was made by Councilmember Davis, seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez. Dr. Scagliola, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Dr. Kaiser, Councilmember Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 11, ordinance number 18M25. Motion to approve with the changes as noted. Motion was made by Councilmember Larson, seconded by Dr. Scagliola. Dr. Scagliola, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Dr. Kaiser, Councilmember Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 12, resolution number 18R73. Motion was made by Dr. Scagliola, seconded by Dr. Kaiser. Dr. Kaiser, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Dr. Kaiser, Councilmember Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, next up we have a couple of workshops. The first one is an overview of the city's credit card policy. Mr. Walters.
All right, good evening again.
Good evening.
I have just after 8 o'clock. Everything's about done. We have 2 finance workshops coming up, so I think we're about halfway through tonight. Bring up the staff went back through and reevaluated its old credit card policy and did a lot of updates. Started off with just reviewing and collecting information from surrounding cities and looking at their policies and what they require. We made some updates. We went into a focus group and got their feedback and opinions. We took it to, of course, through legal, and then came back to the city management and got their input and review. And we've actually been soft rolling out like a soft open or a beta the past few months, walking it through and having our staff that have credit cards review and sign. We haven't gotten through all of them yet, but we're now into the point where we're starting to go out and get a bunch of people updated and educated and get this new policy signed. So we're taking this opportunity to come to council. I'm going to hit on what I think are important pieces, especially those that are applicable to the city council, because at the end, if not tonight, then sometime in the next week, we would like you who hold credit cards on council to sign this policy and set the understanding and have that returned to us. We do have a new credit card for Mr. Gutierrez and David Scagliola in the office, so whenever they're around next, they can come on by and pick that up. But starting off with the credit card policy, what I think really captures the essence of the entire policy is the second paragraph. As the city of Schertz provides business credit cards to allow for and provide immediate access to goods and or services, to more easily allow for travel and to make small purchases with vendors with whom the city does not have an account or line of credit. Individuals issued to credit cards may initiate a transaction within the limits of this policy and receive goods with the approval of their department head as applicable. So a clear distinction here is to make sure that the city does not have an account or line of credit. So if we have an established account, let's say with Lowe's, they're not going by and using the credit card at Lowe's. We have a process whereby we can go use Lowe's and put it on the city's overall account as long as they have a purchase order ready to give them at checkout. And we want to use that avenue as much as possible instead of relying on the credit card. Under the credit card holder liability, the card holder is responsible to ensure the credit card use is in keeping with the city's purchasing guidelines and those policies and procedures related to the expenditure of city funds. Failure to comply may result in permanent revocation of the credit card privilege or disciplinary action including termination and or holding the cardholder personally liable for transactions up to and including payroll deductions for the total dollar amount of unauthorized purchases, plus any administrative fees that may be incurred. So department heads have, by authorizing a credit card for one of their staff, they are basically delegating part of their ability to make purchases up to their $100,000 limit as defined in the purchasing policy. Because of the immediate access to goods and services who have a credit card, it is up to the department head to review those credit card transactions monthly and document their review by approving a purchase order or by written acknowledgement, if that's the only way we can get that.
Mr. Walters, before you go on, just for clarification for anybody that may see the video later, it's up to their $1,000 limit. You accidentally said $100,000.
Oh, 1,000. Yes, I'm sorry. 1,000.
Only
1,000.
1,000.
A single thousand. The next section, authorized credit card use, goes into a section of what's appropriate to be used on the credit card. So the credit card has the cardholder's name embossed on it and shall be used only by that cardholder. No other person authorized to use that credit card to help mitigate fraud use or fraud getting that credit card number out to multiple people. It helps us identify if that purchase was made on that card, it was by that person. This credit card is approved form of payment by the City of Schertz and must follow approved procurement processes, including the purchasing policy. So credit cards should be used to procure small dollar amount items necessary for day-to-day use or to book hotel rooms and flights for travel. Single item purchases over $1,000 require executive director approval prior to being ordered or using the credit card. That's in keeping with our purchasing policy. So executive directors must approve purchases over $1,000. So just by having a credit card with immediate access to goods, you still have to make sure you have that approval before you go spending anything over $1,000. So written approval can be substituted for a purchase over $1,000 in an emergency situation, disaster response, or prevent stoppage in service due to a disaster or emergency situation. But a purchase order must be completed as soon as possible once the emergency situation is resolved. Tips on meals is acceptable on the credit card and must coincide with the approved amount and the travel policy, which will be a policy coming to council next. And then credit card may only be used for official city business and expenditures. So unauthorized use, so no other individual may use the card. It should not be used to pay vendors with whom the city has an account or line of credit. No purchase can be made, no purchase may be made not in keeping with the city's purchasing guidelines, as well as those policies and procedures related to the expenditure of city funds, so no gift of public funds, no personal use. The cardholder is not authorized to make single item purchases or enter into service contracts over $1,000 without executive director approval via purchase order. The cardholder who makes unauthorized purchases, carelessly uses the credit card, or fails to turn in the appropriate documentation may be liable up to a payroll deduction for the dollar amount of the unauthorized purchase, plus administrative fee. And then the credit card shall not be used, again, for personal and unauthorized purposes. You can see we reiterate ourselves a couple of times. We really want to drive these points home and make it clear to everyone what these purchases should be for. General information on the credit card limits and merchant restrictions. So all new credit cards have a default amount of $3,000. If you have an amount of a different value, it's already grandfathered in. The amounts can be changed to temporarily increase with the reasoning with an email to the finance director, and can be permanently changed with authorization of the executive director. Also, for your information as well, so certain merchants are actually denied automatically for the city use of the city card. So they will not work at just any point of business. They have to be coded as an authorized type of business. So Lowe's, those types, H-E-B, Walmart's should have no issues. The only time we have had issues with this in the past have been if they go to a bar and grill this type of situation. It is a restaurant. Those for that purposes. We do check to make sure there's no alcoholic purchases on there. But that is, we have had in the past types of those merchants actually denied when they're at the location. So they can call up to the finance department and we can reach out to the merchant provider and have them temporarily authorize that purchase or to add that vendor or classification code to the approved list. So it would prevent that issue from going forward. So people just can't go to any sort of business and use the credit card. It has to be an approved vendor list. One thing pertaining to all card holders, including the City Council, we do require that the credit card purchase is made. We keep documentation and proof of purchase. So for the use of business lunch or dinner, the back of the receipt must list those in attendance as well as the purpose of the meeting. And then when a purchase is made over the counter, the card holder shall retain the original customer copy of the charge receipt. Before signing the slip, the card holder is responsible for making sure that the vendor lists the quantity and fully describes the items on the charge slip. So you get two receipts. You have one that lists all the items, and you have one that you sign with the charge. You require both of those receipts to be combined and turned in. In the event of a lost receipt, the card holder can contact finance and have a proof of purchase form that they can fill out and then have the executive director review and sign. And just also for information, purchase orders for credit card purchases must be approved by a supervisor of the card holder, and the elected and point official credit card purchases will be approved by the city manager's office. So one thing this section does is we don't want somebody charging their card and then approving the purchase order themselves with no other oversight that would normally occur. Credit card security, it provides the phone number to contact if an item is lost or stolen, as well as instructions if that were to happen. Card holder separation is a new section that we added. It requires that the card holder must surrender their card to the finance director within 14 days of separating from their position when possible. So that doesn't mean it could be termination, it could be transferring to a position that no longer requires a credit card. In either way, if we know that they're no longer going to be using the card, we want that back right then and there. If just so happens if someone were to use that card inappropriately, if they were leaving the city, it's some time before we get the actual statement, depending on if they time it right. And so they could be long gone, out the door with their final paycheck by the time we see that they made some unauthorized or unapproved purchases. So we're requiring that those credit cards be turned in 14 days prior to their leaving. Review an internal audit, so both purchasing and finance will periodically review statements to make sure all purchases are in compliance. We have a detail for card holders to go through and set up an online account and to download their monthly statements. One thing I did want to point out in this section specifically was this bullet point. Departments can do a single purchase order for the entire credit card statement. And this policy supersedes the requirements in the purchasing policy of having a purchase order for every purchase. As mentioned in this policy, that if they have an item over $1,000, they still have to do a separate purchase order for that one, but everything else can be put on one purchase order. So currently our policy says you have to have a purchase order before you go out and make a purchase. But one thing we looked at when we got a bunch of credit card policies from our neighbors, about 50% actually have a credit card or a merchant provider that links up directly to their financial software. So they would download monthly their statements, and through that system, key in the account to be charged, key in the general ledger account that the charge will go to, and then press a button, and it'll go off to their supervisor, and then they'll press it, and it'll be posted to our general ledger and ready to be paid. So basically, this section was to allow something as a similar process that our department heads could take advantage of because our current system does not link together that way. So it's kind of a workaround that we've come up with to allow for them to reduce some of the administrative burden of making all these small purchases and doing all those additional purchase orders. The last section or one of the last sections I want to touch on specifically. So a general list of the cardholder responsibilities. If they take nothing else from this list is what they need to focus on. Keep the credit card in their possession, ensure the card's used in accordance with the policies, maintain the credit card data in secure location at all times, obtain all sales slips, register receipts, and credit card slips, and provide them to finance and attach to a purchase order. Turn in purchase orders with receipts in a timely manner. Attempt to resolve billing disputes or errors with the vendor and notify finance if they're having trouble. Ensure that a appropriate credit for a reported billing error shows up on the next statement, something that they may forget. But make sure you get that credit back on there. Ensure that sales tax has not been received. A lot of our, or all of our purchases are tax exempt for business purposes. So we need to make sure the sales tax is not on the receipts. Report a lost or stolen card to the agency immediately. Notify finance of a stolen card immediately. Return the credit card to finance within 14 days. And then retain all copies of credit card transactions, receipts, and payments in the department for at least one fiscal year. We'll have a second copy, the original copy, in finance, and we will keep those for the life of the record retention state guidelines. But for ease of access and ease of reference, we recommend the department keep those for a year as a second copy. And then the final piece, validate all merchandise is actually received. So unlike many other purchases in the city where we place an order, we get it, we turn around then and cut the purchase order, cut a check. When you order stuff online via credit card, you pay immediately and then the merchandise comes in. So it's up, just to remind all the card holders and department heads that if you buy something online or paying for it immediately, make sure we actually receive the merchandise. And the final section that we added, sort of an acknowledgement statement. So the card holder will sign saying acknowledge and review the credit card policy. And then there is a second part that's signed once the credit card is turned back into finance. So we have the employee signing that they checked it out, and then we have the finance director signing that they've had it returned. And then we keep those documents in case there's any questions.
So I will say this maybe in sort of closing. You have credit cards. You have those credit cards generally for travel training opportunities so that there's not an issue with a council member who wants to go to TML or something like that, getting to the hotel, having to put that in. We typically don't do rental cars, but that would be the case. But to be blunt, there's really not a reason for you to use your credit card other than that. So if in doubt, call me and ask beforehand. But again, what we want to do is make sure that when council members want to avail themselves of those sort of group training sessions, things like that, that everybody has the ability to attend without any issue. But again, we'll likely shouldn't be seeing a lot of credit card charges show up, and we really haven't. So, but again, since you have them, wanted to walk you through the same process.
Very good, thank you. Council, questions? Mr. Davis.
Number one, I'm going to throw the attorney under the bus. He pointed out that you have two number 13s. But more importantly, in paragraph 11, we say that ensure the card is used in accordance with policies and procedures for legitimate City of Schertz business purposes only. And in paragraph 3, we say no purchases may be made not in keeping with the city's purchasing guidelines as well as those policy procedures relating to expenditure of city funds. Do we have a separate sheet that goes a little bit more into detail with the do's and don'ts? For example, I would guess that for a city employee, using the card to put gas in a city vehicle would be authorized. Using a card to put gas in their own vehicle would be unauthorized unless that vehicle is being used in accordance with or in conjunction with approved official travel. So do we have a cheat sheet that sort of says, here are the do's and don'ts in general? And, in another point, for example, we say that when used for a business lunch or dinner, the back of the receipt must list those in attendance and the subject or purpose of the business meeting. Do we provide any guidance on who can and cannot and when they should or should not do a business lunch or business dinner? Because I think that single line by itself is kind of vague and kind of broad. I mean, the way it's worded in here, if you don't have any supporting documentation or guidance, a department head could say, I'm going to do a business lunch, an office meeting, a work meeting with lunch once a week.
No, I think that makes sense, Councilmember. So here's one thing to keep in mind, and I think we discussed some of those issues on a number of occasions as we went through this policy and as we've gone through the purchasing policy. I think, and certainly we appreciate input on areas that council feels like, hey, we think a little more detail would be helpful and would be useful. I think some of the things like, for instance, business lunches, there are a number of ways an employee could pay for that. A credit card is just a means to do that. So one of the issues we have, for example, goes into really a bit of overlap between policies. The way we have handled it to date, and again, if council says, hey, let's add this to the list and let's come back, and again, we're planning hopefully to come next week on the purchasing policy with things like that, but if there's not enough room, there is. Part of it, the expectation is that those credit card receipts and the POs are reviewed at a higher level. And so one of the things that we'll occasionally look for is when something shows up as a lunch. So, for instance, Garcia's, for example, and I'll be real blunt with an example. The IT department may have an employee leave and say, hey, let's do a going away party. We're not doing a celebration. We're not doing anything at the Civic Center, but we'll head over to Garcia's and buy lunch there for employees. That gets reviewed and looked at, for the IT department. I oversee that and look at it and ask those questions about that. And so certainly I think there have been questions or issues taken up in the past of, hey, we seem to be spending a lot for lunch. What was the issue? What was there? How many people are there? So we've deferred that to the discretion of the reviewer. If that's something that you'd like us to do, we can go into a bit more detail and add some of that as part of a handout. I mean that sincerely.
And I agree. I think this is overdue, and like you pointed out on our previous one, the previous one said cards are issued to an individual and it's their responsibility, and then a paragraph later it said he can hand it off to somebody else. That's a bad situation to put somebody into if you're giving your card to somebody else, because ultimately what they do falls on you. Again, I'm not against business lunches or department lunches, but I think it's like I said, I think we need to have some suggested guidelines or some recommended do's or don'ts that would prevent somebody from putting themselves in a position. I mean, we go on to saying here, if you use it wrong, you're responsible for the bill and you're subject to termination. So I think it wouldn't be a bad idea as the next step to provide some clarification and guidance and says, it's okay that if you're going to have a going away function, I'm not against using city dollars for employee recognition programs, but if we're going to say that you can use your city charge card to do that luncheon, I think that there has to be an explanation to the employees that there's a reasonable expectation to be conservative with our city tax dollars, because there's a difference between a department going out and saying goodbye to somebody at Garcia's and someone going out and saying, well, we're going to do your going away party at Ruth Chris Steakhouse, and you're charging, the limit's $1,000, but without some further clarification, you see where this can lead into.
So let us take a crack at this, Councilman, and maybe what we can try to do. I think we're shooting to come back with the purchasing policy next week, but a couple things we're working on just to let you know, and maybe would not surprise me, we have to come back and tweak a couple other policies. So a couple things is Linda Klepper and Sarah and her team have gone over sort of an initial crack at one of the things we talked about, which is that sort of when employees leave the city, how much do we spend, this and that and the other. Traditionally, frankly, how much we spent was based on your rank within the organization. I think the new policy basically looks at it more from a perspective of how long your tenure is here. So certainly my short tenure as acting city manager wouldn't expect a lot to be done, even though the rank, and I think it's more consistent with the values the organization holds. So if I've got a 30-year employee who's a parks maintenance worker or something like that, frankly, we would do a bigger send-off for them than we do for an executive director that's been here 3 years or something like that, and I think that's consistent. So we may capture some of that with that, including when people can go. The other thing typically we'll do is we have differing practices right now with regard to holiday celebrations, typically around Christmas. Some departments do sort of we have an event to get together, some of the larger ones. Other departments do a potluck, some again smaller ones. Let's go out to eat at Garcia, something like that. So I think that's a valid point. The last thing we've struggled with to give you, and this kind of goes to meal, but I think it fits to it, is we have struggled a bit with the travel training. Our practice now is when you go out of town for a conference, we pay you the per diem because, frankly, we don't want to mess with how much you spent, what's appropriate, what's not, what's too much for a meal in Dallas versus Austin, something like that. So you get a set amount based on the per diem. Where we have struggled with that, and I think the biggest challenge for us that's held us up on coming back with that, is a bit of the circumstance. This goes a little bit to credit card use, kind of, but it's tangential, is when you leave the city for a meeting. So say I've got a meeting down in San Antonio with City of San Antonio on some issue related to the city. My kind of thing typically is I'll swing through, grab myself something to eat. I may just swing through someplace here. And so from my perspective, and I'll be blunt, as an executive director, I get paid a substantial amount, and I'll go out and buy lunch or bring my own lunch or whatever. Not a big deal to me. That's a very different situation than if we were to send, and again, I'll use the example, a much lower paid employee down to San Antonio for a training session, and that employee might typically bring their lunch. So I would agree with you. I think we can do some things that likely may cause us to have some additional materials or attachment. I think some of what we've been dealing with is how we reconcile these for a number of different policies so that we capture it fully where it needs to be. So I think it's a valid point. We'll talk to you a little bit about some of the things we're doing on the purchasing policy and then some of the other policies that Councilman has mentioned that we've worked on. Again, Sarah's team working on the kind of retirement celebration function kind of thing. Again, James's team taking the lead on the travel training policy and how we pay with that. And I think likely we'll have to reconcile that here, because really where we tend to use credit cards now is not travel training for meals. It's business meetings that were out of those celebrations. So I think valid point. Let us try to take a crack at it. It may touch on more policies, but let me let Jessica and James kind of, not talk about it.
And then just to do the nature of the topic, they're as far as business lunches or meals, we have very, very few in the grand scheme of things. That is not something that we have a department that's going out regularly and doing.
But valid point. While we haven't had a problem with it, doesn't hurt to spend a little bit of time, and probably not a lot, to say let's map out some things based on the practice. I think valid point on council's part, given again, as we talked about with an earlier item, it is the public funds, and I think there's a higher standard that we are held to. Fair point.
Anyone else?
And to Mr. James's point, HR has been working with public affairs on employee recognition, and so that would include the retirement, and like you mentioned, other celebratory events that take place in honor of employees. And so we are working on a policy to come to bring to y'all. As Mr. James mentioned, it's going to take into consideration seniority, tenure, and a couple of other things. And so it hopefully is going to not only speak to retirement, but some of the other employee events that we host as well. So we will be bringing that forth.
Is there any other gray areas that council may think of that would cause questions or be in the FAQ that we could get as well? I think for the business lunch, a lot of that is governed by the IRS code when it becomes an actual business expense versus when it turns into a sort of a salary or a wage payment instead, and then that's a benefit to the employee that's then taxable, and other guidelines that we could follow to make sure that that's listed out a little bit more clearly. But everything else, I think that one's one of the gray areas. I think some of the personal versus business can be very clear sometimes. But if there's gray areas, that's the one we want to address.
Certainly feel free to council, I'd say, is in helping move this forward. As you think about this stuff, if you have a thought, feel free to shoot me an email, and then as we come back, we'll kind of tack it on and walk everybody through it.
All right. Doesn't look like I have anything else. Mr. Walters, thank you, sir. And you have the next one as well. We have a workshop, City of Schertz monthly investment report presentation.
That's what I was looking for. All right. So this is a report that we will be submitting to council on a quarterly basis going forward, along with the quarterly financial report. You can expect to see that report at the next council meeting. But before we got into that, I wanted to walk you through one of the monthly reports that we have been preparing so that it's easier to look at, read, and try to understand what you're looking at when you look at the quarterly investment report. So I'm going to jump around to a couple of different places. And first, I'm going to start at the back with the terms, with the glossary investment report terms that we have listed. So a lot of this report is actually dictated that we have to have certain information listed by the Public Funds Investment Act. So that's a state statute that requires these reports to come out no less than quarterly and to include certain specific information. So some of those information terms are listed here. So we have, first off, is a book value, also called the cost, which is the amount the city paid to acquire an investment and be the market value at the time of the purchase. So all investments, much like our bonds, have a par amount or a stated value, and then we can pay more or less from them based on what the market's doing at the time. So what we record is the book value originally, so how much we pay for the actual acquisition. The next one is the yield. So it's the annual projected earnings divided by the current market value. So how much are we actually earning when comparing it to the market? Purchases, that's what we call whenever we acquire additional investments or invest additional funds. Withdrawals are the opposite when we sell investments or return money to the bank. Interest earned, so the dollars earned on the investments, and is often calculated at a rate on the par value of the stated interest rate of the investment. So each investment will have a par value and a stated interest, and that determines how much we get paid annually. The market value represents what we could sell the asset or sell the investment today. So if we may buy it for $1 million, next week we could sell it for $1.1 million. So that 1.1 is the market value, and we still have it listed as a book value of $1 million. So shares, the original investment is sold in pieces called shares. Each share has a stated par value and interest rate, as I mentioned before. So maturity date, some investments all investments have a date when they are bought back automatically, much like our bonds. And then the weighted average maturity, so it's the average maturity, so how long our portfolio or all of our investments are until they are all returned. So some investments can be mature in a year, some will be returned to us in a week, and based on a weighted average, kind of gives you the idea of how far our portfolio goes out in terms of the investment. An investment pool is much like a money market mutual fund and is often used by local governments. So it's a bunch of participating entities all pool their money, their investment dollars together, and then a managing organization goes off and buys individual investments, which it then splits back out the proceeds to all the participating entities. And then a certificate of deposit as an investment with a fixed maturity date and a specified interest rate, and can be issued for any amount and are issued by basically banks, depository. And one of the benefits for a certificate of deposit is because it's issued by a bank, it is insured by the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, up to $250,000. So if the bank went under, we be protected automatically up to that, and then any collateral agreements we have with the bank will take care of the rest. So I want to touch on that one first and then jump back to the summary. So this is the summary of our investments for June. So how much we deposited into our investments and how much we withdrew. So we have our bank account up top, And then we have Logic, Lone Star, and Texas Class, which are 3 different investment pools, like money market mutual funds. We have a Capital One investment firm that goes off and buys our longer-term investments on our behalf. And then we have some certificates of deposits, or CDs. So in the month of June, we had $11 million deposited into the bank, $2.3 million deposited into Lone Star, $700,000 deposited into our Texas Class, $18,000 deposited into our Capital One account, and then no transactions on the certificates of deposits. So all our CDs are 6 months and 12 months respectively, so they won't be on all the reports with any activity. Withdrawals, we took $8 million out of our bank overall throughout the year. That's checks, that's transfers to and from the investments. Logic, we withdrew $1 million from Logic, $3.9 million from Lone Star, $1.3 million from Texas Class, withdrew $22,000 from the Capital One investment, and nothing there. So that's all said and done. We're trying to maintain a certain balance in the bank, and all the investment pools are very fluid. We can easily move money in and out of them within just a day's notice. But what's probably everyone's really interested in is how much money we were making, so the interest that we actually earned on all these investments. So for the month of June, we actually made $139,000 in interest. So it's not too bad, especially considering where we were right after the recession and rates were really low. That also affected how much investment earnings we had. On the flip side, we got a really good deal on our bond issuances, but then our investment income dried up as a response as well. So the ending market value, if we sold all of our investments today, including the cash in the bank, we could raise $85.6 million. Flip to another chart, another one on the yields. So this is the monthly yields. We have some benchmarks, treasuries, 1, 3, and 6 month treasuries that we compare ourselves to. Then we have our combined Schertz investment portfolio. So the Schertz portfolio starting this year started off at 1.2% annual return, and they are now over 2% annual return. Just a few years ago, we were getting 0.5% and 0.6% annual return throughout the entire portfolio. What has happened in that time period is the Federal Reserve Bank has started to increase and raise the federal funds rate. So the Public Funds Investment Act not only dictates what we have to present to our governing board, but also dictates and limits what we can actually invest in. It only allows us to invest in the most secure types of investments, short-term, mostly federal government or local government issued, the highest credit rating. And what that does is it really limits us on how much investment return we can actually get, which is why we're looking at the 1, 3, and 6 month Treasury bills at this time, with the 6 month being at 2.11 and the 1 and 3 month being at 1.76 and 1.39. So we're right around the 6 month, which you'll see on the next page is very close to what our average weighted average maturity is for our entire portfolio. So the longer you go out, the higher interest rate and yield return you get. One thing I mentioned in the report and the write-up is our CDs right now are actually holding us back a little bit as far as our performance. So CDs, as I mentioned, lock us into an interest rate, and we can't change that until it matures, then we can renew at a higher rate or move the money to another instrument. So our CDs are earning 1.5 and 1.25, much lower, and they're locked us to 6 months to a year. That's how we're locked in. All of our investment pools, our money market mutual funds that we can move money in and take money out the next day, they're now earning over 2%. So they're beating the investment that we're stuck at for 6 months and 12 months. Back when we invested in our last CD was last November, and we got a 1.5 return for a 1-year CD, and we thought that was fantastic. That was going to blow out all the other interest rates that we're currently getting. And what happened 6 months later? The Fed made 2 moves on the federal funds rate, and all of a sudden our short-term rates were above the CDs. So we're making more money on our short term than we were on our longer term at that time. It's not uncommon. We do want to make sure we diversify and do have some investments out in the long term. Because while the Federal Reserve raised rates, and that hurt us a little bit, we'd be singing a different tune if they went the other direction. They froze rates, or if they some other market or economic disaster happened and then they had to cut rates instead. All of a sudden we'd be going, oh, I'm glad we locked in that $1 million for 1.5, because all these other guys are now earning back down to maybe 50 basis points or 0.5%, like we were just not too long ago. So it is important to have a balance or diversify your investment portfolio, and that means even taking some out a little bit longer to kind of hedge for that potential for decrease in the rates. Going through, so currently these are very small font. We are required to list all of this stuff on our report, and we will work to make it a little bit larger for the quarterly report. But a couple of graphs I did want to go over. So the investment by type. So operations or the bank, we have 14% of that $85 million in there. Logic, Lone Star, and Texas Class each about 25%, so about a fourth each. And the reason we invest in multiple investment pools, it doesn't cost us anything else. And if you look on the return, each of them have a little bit different return. Sometimes one's a little bit higher, sometimes one's a little bit lower, but it all averages out in the end, and so we're earning a steady return. Capital One and CDs are the long term, about 4% and 5% respectively. Now what the city was doing with that is we don't have a lot of money out long term. We were actually anticipating the federal rate increase and the rising interest rates, and purposefully did not put money into a bunch of money into long term so we could take advantage of that rising interest rates. Probably after this next December, if the Fed raises it 1 or 2 more times, so our investment strategy that's in our investment policy, we may come back to council and recommend that we change the structure a little bit and start going out a little bit longer. Since we're so closely tied to the federal funds rate and they're about to hit their historical average, once they get past that, we may want to start moving out a little bit further, because it's an average for a reason, and we'll do it in slow increments. But we won't start seeing these rapid rises in the short-term rates anymore. I think after they get to that average, which will make those longer-term investments more attractive and not look like they're costing us money when we could be earning some in the shorter term. The other chart, portfolio by use. So we do have $85.6 million. It sounds like a lot of money, but a lot of it's tied up for very specific purposes. So operationally, we have about $35 million right now. That includes the $12 million the general fund has in its reserves. Includes another amount similar in the water and sewer, as well as the EDC. Designated special revenue, those are revenue the city has opted into that's set aside for very specific purposes, like the hotel tax, for example, the economic development investment. The debt service fund, so that is our INS fund. That's money that can only be spent on paying our debt. So we had about $2 million at the end of June, and we have another debt payment coming up at the beginning of August. So in the next quarterly report, you'll see that one take a hit. And then the projects fund, about $15 million. Those are some unspent bonding funds. So again, we can't use those just for any type of purpose. And then the other 2 or 3 pages listed in here are the breakout of each of our investment types, and we have them broken out by account. So each account has sub-accounts to help us identify what funds are going where and what they're identified for. And they list how much money is going in, how much money is coming out, what interest rate are we earning, and what the average maturity is on those investments as well. I will not go over that directly. You guys can look through it on your own, and please let me know if you have any questions. we hope that you understand this report, and if you have any comments or suggestions for improvement, we will be happy to take those and include them in the quarterly investment reports that we'll be sending to you starting next council meeting.
All right, Mr. James.
And then lastly, I'd say, there is training that's mandatory for some of the staff people involved in this and on the investment committee. So if anyone is very interested in the topic or feels like, hey, I'd like to know more, I think we've got training coming up in the next couple months in the San Antonio area.
Sadly, that one's with the council retreat, but there is the opportunity to go to a one-day, so it's usually a day and a half.
Yeah.
So on Thursday, the 6th in December, TML has a Public Funds Investment Act training. Staff that fill out the report as a designated financial officer has to go to that every other year, and anybody else that signs this report has to go to it every other year.
But again, if we have a council person who's interested, let us know, and happy to have you along, and I think can be very informative on some background information.
Very good. Council, questions on this one?
Couple
Mr.
points.
Gutierrez?
On your future slides, on this particular one, if we can put the total at the top somewhere in there, and also label it previous slide so we can do a comparison with the new one. I would like to see that.
So the portfolio by use
Yes.
and the investment type, your suggestion was to make sure on the use was to have the total dollar amount.
So the number, right or left-hand corner.
Okay.
And label it previous slide so we can do a comparison with the new slide. In other words, you're going to have two slides.
Oh, one per quarter. So you have this
Yes.
portfolio by use by quarter.
For comparisons.
Understood.
Thank you.
Mr. Davis.
James, did you put this together?
This one was not me in person, no.
What I'm saying is, does the city put this together as far as the grass and stuff? On the slide that shows the monthly yields, you said that the 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month are used as benchmarks?
Yes.
So they're not our investments, they're just a benchmark that we compare our investments to?
Correct.
It might be easier to read because it's getting to be quite an eye chart. If you convert the 1, 3, and 6 month to a line plot instead of a bar chart, I don't know, that may give us a little bit wider bars, and this way we're not looking at the first 3 columns in every one are not actually how we're performing. They're benchmarks for somebody else. Maybe a different way of looking at it. If it doesn't look kind of better, then go back with this. But
Yeah, let us take a crack, and we'll shoot some stuff out to you all in both comments and see what you think, and then try some different things.
All right. Anyone else? All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. All right. The next 2 items that we have on the agenda are the domain of City Council. Under normal circumstances, I've said, we've got a member missing, and then kind of poll the council, see if we want to take these up. The only differing factor this time is I have a note from Mr. Edwards saying he's fine if we go forward. So I would ask on item number 14, what's the desire of council? Do we want to meet and move forward this evening? Or we want to wait for a full council?
I say we go forward. We missed last week waiting, and we're going to be off another week. And
Okay. Anyone does not want to move forward on 14? All right, we'll do that first then, and let's have about a 5-minute recess, and then we will go into closed session. City Council will meet in closed session, or Section 551.074 of the Texas Government Code, personnel matters to deliberate the appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignment, duties, discipline, or dismissal of the city manager. At this time, we will go into recess for our open session, and we'll come out of closed session as soon as we can. Session. Next item on the agenda is item 15. City Council will meet in closed session under Texas Government Code Section 551.071, consultation with the city attorney, and Section 551.074, personal matters to deliberate the complaint about and the evaluation duties or discipline of a city council member. We're not going to do a recess this time. We're going to go straight into closed session, be out as quickly as we can. 9 minutes after 10, and we are back in open session. On item number 14, City Council met in closed session. With regard to the city manager, there's no action to be taken there. Item number 15, City Council met in closed session. With regard to an allegation of an ethics violation, I'm going to make a motion from the chair. I move that it be the official finding of this council that there has been no violation of our ethics codes, code of conduct, or rules of procedure pertinent to the allegations brought forward. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Larson. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. I have 4 ayes and 1 present. The motion carries.
Aye.
Thank you, sir. I have 5 ayes and 1 present. The motion carries. That said, next item is a roll call vote confirmation. Mrs. Dennis?
I'm going to do my best. Motion was made from the chair, seconded by Council Member Larson, that there was no finding of any ethics.
Tell you what, how about if I read it?
There you go.
Motion was made from the chair that it be the official finding of this council that there has been no violation of our ethics codes, code of conduct, or rules of procedure pertinent to the allegations brought forward. And the vote was?
The vote was Dr. Scagliola, Council Members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Kaiser Crawford voted yes. No one voted no.
Kaiser is present.
Kaiser, I'm sorry, what?
Kaiser is present.
Kaiser is present.
No vote was made. Kaiser is present. We have 5 ayes.
5 ayes and
1 present.
1 present.
Mm-hmm.
Motion passed.
Yes, ma'am. That is correct. All right. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening, we have requests and announcements. First, we have announcements by the acting city manager. Anything further, Mr. James?
No, sir.
Next item, we have a request by the mayor and council members that items be placed on a future city council agenda. Brenda, I have one. I should like that at our very next meeting, we need to have discussion and possible action on potential changes. I'll give this to you afterward as well, to the city council rules of procedure and code of ethics. Mr. Larson.
Maybe, hopefully not too specific, but I would like to have discussion and possible action as it relates to the development code and the masonry wall requirement. That's probably the number one complaint I've heard, probably from 7 or 8 different people developing. And so maybe it needs to stay, maybe it doesn't, but I'd like to have staff review it, come up with recommendations, tell us what other communities are doing, and options that we have to maybe make some changes.
Very fine. Anyone else? Dr. Scagliola?
I have a couple of items. First off, I'd like some information about the distribution practice of our water bills. My wife mentioned that she only had about 5 days to pay the bill when it finally got in the mail, and I didn't think a whole lot of it, but I just got a letter from another resident asking the very same question. Apparently, maybe going through Cibolo post office, it slows down the process a little bit, and residents don't have enough time to pay the bill. The second thing is, I've got a request that we look into a UDC zoning to allow for the zoning of green space, and I don't know if we should run that through the Parks Department for consideration, or just have a public meeting with a hearing of residents attached to it. I don't know what the correct procedure would be, but please, I ask you to look into that. And the third thing is, I was up to New Braunfels for a little tour, and man, they had some beautiful murals up there. And I asked them how they paid for it, and they said from the hot tax. I says, oh wow. I'd like to explore some opportunities to use some of our hotel occupancy tax funds to beautify the city. That's all I have, sir.
Very good. Mr. Crawford?
I have a question for you, Mr. Mayor, and also have something I'd like to put on the agenda. Father Ed made a comment about some issues on P&Z and UDC kind of stuff. Is that something we should discuss on an agenda on a council meeting at some point in time, or is that something council is going to staff is going to look into? Or
Mr. Larson, are just asked to have that on a future agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, specifically about the retaining, about the 8-foot masonry wall.
Okay. I didn't connect those two together. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I would like to have on the agenda possibly the next council meeting.
I can't hear you. Can you get to the mic?
I got it.
Would like to have on the next agenda, if possible, for discussion and possible action, changing our mayor pro temp procedures back to the 6-month rotational for council members instead of 1 year, and get that sequence going back like it used to be, where everybody gets some training to be the mayor pro temp if necessary.
And we've actually already got that one because I said that we would have our rules of procedure.
Okay, so we can discuss it during that one then.
Absolutely. That's part
Okay.
of our rules of procedure. So that's already on.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, if not, we're going to move on to announcements by the mayor and council members. We'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Scagliola.
Thank you, sir. I had my brother in town this weekend. He's a retired police officer from Connecticut, and made an appointment with Chief Hansen. And thank you so very much, Chief. You made me look good. I don't know. You made me sound more important than I really am. So thank you and your personnel who he had a good time. The other thing is, about a week ago, Mr. James, you put out an email about appointments to different boards and commissions. And hey, you know what? I'd love to have my name scratched down next to the Sweethearts Court. One of the things I missed most about this city when a couple of years back. Anyway, that's all I have, sir.
Very good. Mr. Davis?
Nothing, sir.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Several things. First, I went to the Santigos presentation. They sponsored a visit of the theater over in the west side of town. This past Friday, we went, our law firm had the Hog Wild. Interesting seminars, thanks to Mr. Santee and staff. The YMCA hosted a government day this past Monday. That was pretty interesting. Everybody wanted to be mayor. I wonder why. We also had the YMCA and the city of Schertz sponsored the movie in the pool, I guess, right? Floating Flicks. That was pretty exciting. I swam for about an hour and a half, and I couldn't stay till the end of the movie. I was scared. Yeah, it was Jaws. Cibolo dedicated a garden park for Ron Petey's in Ron Petey's name on Monday. And this morning we had the Junior Police Academy. That was pretty interesting. They had the canines there. And this one is exciting. During the chamber luncheon, the mayor spoke on leadership. It was an interesting perspective on leadership. Thanks, Mayor. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Larson?
Nothing.
Dr. Kaiser?
Nothing.
Mr. Crawford?
Two things. It's nice to see that Sedona has their HOA now, and we can hopefully they get their board all elected like it needs to be. And if you'd let me know that, that'd be nice, Ms. Hicks. And secondly, Ralph and I both attended the Hog Wild thing. I shouldn't say thing. The Hog Wild educational briefings, which they were. Mr. Stantee did a pretty good game that was certainly kept us awake and involved. Chief of Police from Pflugerville was certainly interesting to hear. I'm glad I went, and I thank the city and the law firm for having that opportunity to learn some things. Thank you very much.
Very good. I have nothing to add given the late hour. If there's nothing else from staff or from council, we stand adjourned.